right here, which many people are excited about. And you talk about the feeling this year about CPAC compared to the feeling last year at CPAC. Think about this. Last year, we faced the prospect of a Hillary Clinton presidency. We faced the prospect of gun control like you would not believe. We faced the prospect of the liberal left getting their way with everything they wanted in Washington. And oh, how things can change. And so now the mood here is one of excitement of what's to come. Donald Trump is scheduled to speak tomorrow, which is interesting that CPAC got Donald Trump to come to speak at CPAC. Now, remember, when they did the straw poll last year, Ted Cruz had won the straw poll pretty handily. Donald Trump got 15% of the vote, so you can make an argument that this is not exactly Donald Trump's base crowd. Donald Trump had some proving to do among real conservatives. He is doing that. Donald Trump has gotten to work in short order. Let's take a look now into the hall, where a little later this morning, Kellyanne Conway will be speaking, Ted Cruz will be speaking, and they have some things and some entertainment on stage as we lead up to all of that. So it should be a very exciting day. The other thing that I want to tell you, which we are excited about, is the whole team is here. So we'll be talking with Dana Lash a little bit later in this program. But I want to welcome Bill Whittle to the set here at NRATV at CPAC. Bill, it is so great to have you here with us.
You look even better in 3D, Grant.
Well, you know what's crazy is this is the first time I've met you in person. Well, last night we had a couple drinks together, but first time we've met in person, and it couldn't be at a better place.
No, absolutely. My first CPAC was in 2009 in February, so Obama had been elected a month earlier, and they were just passing the stimulus package as we were here. And it was like a funeral procession, only not so cheerful or upbeat. You know, I mean, it was horrible. People were walking around stunned. And now the whole vibe is very different. What you said about Donald Trump having to prove something here is a really good point, I think. I have run into a lot of people who were strong anti-Trump people, you know, almost a couple of never-Trump people. And his appointments and the amount of work he's done in the first month is swaying a lot of people, and I think he's off to a really good start.
You know, when you think about the controversy that we had here over the years at CPAC, last year it really was the Never Trump movement. Mm-hmm. And conservatives didn't know how to deal with this Never Trump movement because it really almost threatened the election. It turned out to be a much smaller faction of the Republican Party than the media gave credit to. And I think the media tried to push the Never Trump movement just to trip up Republicans. But that was one controversy, and the media is always trying to stir up controversy about this place.
Yeah, and it was not too long ago. In fact, it was probably November 7th or 6th or something, when everybody was talking about the demise of the Republican Party. There's this gigantic civil war. The Trumpers and never-Trumpers are going to fight forever. Republicans are going to be in the weeds for 50 years. It's an uninterrupted string of Democratic victories stretching to the horizon, and everybody's writing the epitaph for the Republican Party. And then 24 hours later, the presidency, the Senate, the House of Representatives, tremendous cabinet, one Supreme Court pick, probably two, maybe even three or more. So it was almost like we entered an alternate reality, and the alternate reality is a lot better than the one we were living in.
Yeah, it sure is. So now becomes the message, and there are an awful lot of lawmakers that come here to this show. And the CPAC convention. And so these lawmakers are really being put on notice by the activists here because they've got to get to work. We've seen Donald Trump in 4 weeks issue a number of executive orders. There is no doubt about it that he is sticking to his campaign promises and getting to work. I would make an argument that Congress, the United States Senate, the House of Representatives have in some respects almost been sitting back on their heels and not getting to work fast enough. You know, Wayne LaPierre says, our time is now. We have control of this place. Let's get to work. And I will bet that the young people in this room, and there's a lot of young people here,
that's right,
will mandate that these politicians start doing something in Washington, because if we lose this one moment in history, we've let it all go.
I've said that actually from the beginning. If we don't take advantage of this to recruit an entire whole new generation of conservatives, then this will be a one-off, and this may be kind of a last stand. We have a lot of young people in there, and to my amazement and delight, we find that kids who are generally 15, 16, 17, 14, 15, far, far more conservative than their older brothers and sisters, maybe the most conservative generation in 3 generations.
Yeah.
And they are sick and tired of hearing this nonsense and watching their brothers and sisters, staying at home in mom's basement at 33 years old, and they don't know how to run a washing machine, for God's sake, and they don't want that for themselves.
You know, when you think about what's going on, clearly the economy is on everyone's mind, especially with these young folks. I mean, Barack Obama wanted to tell us that the economy was doing great, and I just asked people, well, how has your life improved over 8 years? And most people will tell you no. Now, the young people getting out of college, many of them face job prospects, except where we're based in Dallas.
Right.
Texas, if it wasn't for Texas, the country would have been in the tank.
Yeah. And one of the things that was most disturbing to me, especially several years ago, was coming to visit in Texas. And I introduced Ted Cruz in an event 4 or 5 years ago, and to hear story after story after story of people from California, from my state, leaving California because of the ridiculous regulations and the high taxes, and going to Texas so that they can start with a great economy that's humming. And the first thing they do when they get there is start voting for higher taxes and more regulation. It's just appalling.
It is. It's absolutely appalling, and it boggles the mind of why they keep going down the same path when they move to a state that's doing it right and they go back to liberal policies. You know, the other thing on people's minds here clearly is gun rights. And so we now have a movement underway. When you look at everything from constitutional carry underway, we just saw New Hampshire is moving in that direction, and then national reciprocity. National reciprocity is so huge. I have never seen the momentum behind a movement as national reciprocity, which would give everyone who has a concealed handgun license to not give up their rights as they move state to state. And I think you'll hear lawmakers, speakers here talking about gun rights, and certainly Wayne LaPierre on Friday.
You know, we get so bogged down in the details of legislation and what's happening in what state and so on. I think the discussion ought to be very simple. I don't give up my First Amendment right to free speech when I enter the state of New York, and I don't get it back when I go to Texas. My First Amendment rights and my Fifth Amendment rights and my Fourth Amendment rights are good all across the country. So why is it my Second Amendment rights don't have that same privilege?
Yeah. Well, it's amazing they don't. And what is amazing to me is the liberal left cannot understand the difference between a privilege and a right.
Yeah, that's right.
A God-given right is God-given by our Creator. It's not for government to control in any way, shape, or form. A privilege is very different. Driving a car is a privilege. Becoming a doctor is a privilege. You need licensing for that. Carrying a firearm and protecting yourself is a right. The liberal cannot understand the difference between a right and a privilege.
Many conservatives, unfortunately, still think that if you ask them about the Constitution, they'll say, well, the Constitution gives me the right to free speech. And no, it does no such thing. You have the right to free speech. You were born with it. You have the right to defend yourself. You have the right to not incriminate yourself. The Constitution simply says the government can't take these things away from you. This idea of natural law, that you're born with these rights, is really, really important. Because if the government gives you a right, then it can take it away at its pleasure. But that's never how this country's been founded.
There's a lawmaker in Washington State that wants to mandate that all gun owners buy insurance, liability insurance, when they purchase a gun. Now, obviously, this is a Democrat. It's outrageous to me. Look, liability insurance for a concealed handgun license holder is probably a great idea. It's something the NRA endorses for people to have. But nowhere would you ever mandate the government or have the government mandate to you to buy insurance, liability insurance, when you own a firearm, which is your right to own. It would be like, I need insurance to protect my speech.
A free speech license. Yeah, I have to purchase my free speech license for the year. And by the way, there's a lot on the left that are making that push. They've been making it forever. They want journalists to be like, they want an official definition of journalists, and these people can say whatever they want, but bloggers and the rest of those internet loons, that's a whole different story. They're all about control, Grant. They're all about making sure that other people are doing what they want them to do, and it's a real problem, and it's a genetic defect is what it is.
Yeah, it sure is. And so what this is all about is fighting back to those folks. So I just saw a couple girls walk by, young ladies. Socialism sucks. And it was in the same logo that Bernie Sanders had during his presidential campaign. And boy, it couldn't sum it up better here at CPAC.
I've had a chance to talk to a number of young people out at a number of high schools and colleges. And these kids have moral courage. I mean, they are swimming against an unbelievable tide. We don't have any appreciation for the amount of abuse that these kids take, and in some cases, physical courage. So, when
Bill,
you've got these young people, they've got to really have a lot of guts, and they're going to be good people.
They sure do. I want to cut to the stage because I believe they're talking about the NRA, and let's listen into the opening ceremonies.
No.
Who else, Karen, do we have?
I'd like to thank Breitbart for being one of our top sponsors.
We've had a good relationship with Breitbart for a number of years.
For many, many years, yes.
And the now former head of Breitbart is sitting in the White House because Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton.
I would like to thank Heritage Foundation, the mother of all conservative think tanks. Happy to have them as a full partner with us this year.
Yeah, the Heritage Foundation is a very special place. For a long time, it was when President Reagan was president of the United States, it was always referred to as President Reagan's think tank. So the Heritage Foundation is near and dear to our hearts. We work very closely with Senator Jim DeMint and his team. He's got really excellent people at the Heritage Foundation.
And a number of speakers throughout this conference are attached to Heritage. And
That's
we're
right.
very honored to have their thoughts and their enlightenment for this organization, this conference. Who else do we have?
Well, I've got another thing that's
All
near
right,
and dear to
so
my heart.
they're thanking all the conservative groups. Clearly, you heard the Heritage Foundation. They're a terrific group of conservative thinkers. Right before we got to them, they were talking about the NRA. And they were talking about how thankful they are to the NRA. And they asked everybody in the room to raise their hand who supports the NRA. And you better believe every hand went up in that room. And that's what we're talking about, the presence of the NRA and the importance, we've talked about it before, Bill, of 5 million members of the NRA. And what's so interesting, there's probably another 15 million who think they're members and still have the bumper stickers that just haven't paid their dues. But the power, and I was talking to 2 veterans here, young veterans in their 20s, 30s. I said, you're the power. They were coming by so excited to see the NRATV booth. I said, you're the power. It's you guys. You're the members of the NRA. The power starts with the people.
If you're talking about an organization with 5 million active members, it is punching so far above its weight that it's unbelievable. The NRA is the lightning rod for the left. Anytime there's a big rally and Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton want to get a big, rousing cheer, they say, we're going to take on the NRA. And then in parentheses, and deprive American citizens of their rights. They don't quite get to that part. But the fact that the NRA is so demonized by the left is an indication of how powerful it is and how strong it is both politically and kind of ideologically. I mean, this is where the fight is, right? The whole difference between us and the left is we're individualists, they're collectivists, and if you're an individualist and you think your life is worth something or your loved ones, then you want to defend that person's right and not have them be a chalk outline so that you can, talk about things at a cocktail party and sound morally superior to people.
When you think about that power that the NRA has, I was reading some comments by one of the directors of the ACLU, which is not always on the same page as the NRA. But the director of the ACLU gave the NRA props, saying that they are the most engaged grassroots activist group than any other activist group out there, and that any activist group, no matter what your cause is, could take a page out of the NRA's book and how engaged its members are and how passionate its members are.
It is without question the most effective organization in America on either side. That's why it's such an honor to be, to be asked to come and do some shows with you guys. It is essentially the NRA. If you think about it, it's kind of almost like this granite bedrock of American values, and the sand kind of shifts and goes back and forth on the top. But this is it. If you don't have the right to defend yourself, then you are not an individualist. And if you're not an individualist, then you're a collectivist, and you're one of those people that has to tell other people what to do.
You know what I love about this place, and maybe we could just take a shot of the hall. We don't need audio, but if we could take a shot of the hall and look at all the people in the room. When you look at the folks here, can we do that? Can we take a shot? There you go. Okay, so you see all of those people here. Bill, most of those people in that room paid their own way.
Absolutely.
Here. They're not working for companies. This isn't a convention for pharmaceutical reps where they're all in the fancy hotels and on company dime. These folks spent good money, in many cases, thousands of dollars, just to be here and talk to others like them and talk about conservative thinking, talk about gun rights, talk about issues that are important to them, talk about smaller government, limited government, a government that should be non-intrusive. They're all here.
I think it's hilarious that what so many conservatives feel is the safest space in the country. You talk about safe spaces, this is it. It's a place where you can speak your mind. It's probably the most well-defended convention on planet Earth, would be my guess, And it is so hard for people out there to feel any sense of community. What the left often tries to do, in fact, continuously tries to do, is make conservatives feel like they're dinosaurs, like they're the last ones on the whole earth. There's, there are no more people with your values, and liberal values are everything, and that you just basically are the last of a dying breed. And since you're the last of a dying breed, you might as well just go home, sit down, and shut up. But when they come to something like this, they realize that, we've got company here, and we're not the only people in the world. That ability for people to feel some sense of connection and some sense that they are not alone is unbelievably powerful in terms of keeping up the fighting spirit when you've been beaten down for 8 years.
You are exactly right on all the above. And it's why it's so great to be here. Now, I want to turn back into the hall where Kellyanne Conway, the great confidant of Donald Trump, is sitting down for an interview with Mercedes Schlapp. Let's listen in.
Conway, come join us today in this very special CPAC. And I want to start by sharing a little bit about yourself. You started picking blueberries in a farm in New Jersey, raised by these incredibly powerful women, your mom, your grandmother, your 2 aunts.
Yes.
Then you become CEO of a polling company. You work with Republicans across the board, conservatives. Then you become the first successful
All right, folks. So technical difficulties, losing the feed from the floor with Kellyanne Conway, but no big deal, right, Bill? That's what we're here for.
Well, not only that, but Kellyanne Conway is an amazing, remarkable person, and I think there's 2 examples that show just how hypocritical our opposition is. Kellyanne Conway is one, and Condoleezza Rice is another. These 2 women have done unbelievable things. They're not married to anybody powerful like Pelosi and Hillary Clinton. They took what looked like an impossible job and added a lot of discipline and a lot of smarts. And Kellyanne Conway was huge, was probably the single most important influence other than Donald Trump in terms of getting him elected.
Bill, what's so interesting about the left and that they will vilify Republicans and conservatives for being somehow anti-women.
Mm-hmm.
And what has the left wing of this of the mainstream media and the Democratic Party and really the left wing of the nation done? They've come out and they vilified Kellyanne Conway.
Of course.
They're the ones that have diminished her, and they keep diminishing her. And in many respects, they diminish us. I just read an article today, many of them. They call this group the fringe of the Republican Party. The fringe.
CPAC?
I want you to look around here. Tell me if these people look like the fringe of anything.
They're not the fringe. And this is another thing that I'm getting a little tired of, and I think that we have a chance to really start to win. And that is the idea that every piece of leftist opinion is right in the center. So there's only leftist, central, moderate opinion and nutcase right-wingers that are way, way, way out there. It's absolutely not true. It's part of their bubble, but it's absolutely not true. We know what the common values of the American people are, and we know how typical the values of the people here at CPAC are. But we're not seeing that in pop culture. Our entire mythology, Grant, our entire culture is dictated by a small handful of people in skyscrapers and in mansions in the Beverly Hills and in Hollywood, and they actually think that little bubble that they live in is reality. But if I've been to a couple of Hollywood parties and I've been to CPAC, and I can tell you which one of these most represents the American people, and it ain't the Hollywood parties.
No, I'm sure it's not.
It's not.
So look, the weather in California is great. The politics suck. I see why you live there, because it's great to come out of the house every day to 75 degrees.
Yeah.
But, boy, I'll tell you what, in the middle of America, the heart of America, I don't care whether you're in North Dakota where it gets awful darn cold in the winter, all the way down to Texas and Houston and beyond, this is what the mainstream media forgets about. They forget that the people in the heartland of America not only loves their guns and their rights and the Constitution, but they work hard, and all they really want is to be able to pay their mortgage at the end of the month. They want to be able, if their car breaks down, to pay their bills, to get their car fixed and not have to worry about where the money's coming from. That's the American dream.
It is, and if you look at California as an example, you don't have to go all the way east to Texas before you start finding America. You just have to get east of Los Angeles County. If you look at California's voting patterns by county, California's a red state, but there are these 3 huge population centers, well, 2 really big ones, San Francisco and Los Angeles, San Diego to some other degree. But Orange County is probably the most conservative place, certainly in the West. I think there are more Republicans in Orange County than anywhere else in the world. And their voice is so drowned out by what happens in the millions of people in L.A. and San Francisco.
I've related that exact scenario to why we need the Electoral College in the United States. You've got Los Angeles, San Francisco, and these big cities controlling everything. We saw the gun rights issue in Nevada, and in Nevada the same thing happens. It was Clark County voted for these background checks. No other place did, and they almost won. Anyway, let's get out now to Kellyanne Conway. We have audio back from the floor.
It's difficult for me to call myself a feminist in the classic sense because it seems to be very anti-male, and it certainly is very pro-abortion in this context. And I'm neither anti-male or pro-abortion. So there's an individual feminism, if you will, that you make your own choices. Mercedes, I look at myself as a product of my choices, not a victim of my circumstances. And that's really, to me, what conservative feminism, if you will, is all about. My mother didn't feel sorry for herself. She was left with no child support, no alimony at a very young age, with a child to raise, a high school education, and she just figured it out. She didn't complain. She didn't rely upon government. She relied upon her own skill set, her own self-confidence, her own drive and moxie, and her own duty to me and her, and she relied upon her family and her faith. And I believe those are timeless lessons and timeless opportunities for all women in similar circumstances and situations. And I would just say, I mean, one thing that's been a little bit disappointing and revealing is that I hope will get better is, it turns out there are a lot of women who just have a problem with women in power. You know, this whole sisterhood, this whole let's go march for women's rights, and, you know, just constantly talking about what women look like or what they wear, or making fun of their choices, or presuming that they're not as powerful as the men around. This presumptive negativity about women and power, I think, is very unfortunate, because let's just try to access that and have a conversation about it rather than a confrontation about it.
Now, I will tell you, the conservative women and men in this room, we support you. We support you. We've got your back, Kellyanne. We've got President Trump's back as well. Now, you spend time privately with President Trump. We see this public persona, that our tough president. How is he in private?
Well, most of the strength and the leadership skills and the decisiveness, the resoluteness that I think this country was craving from its president, from a leader, is the same in public as it is in private. I find him to be very kind and generous. I find him to have a great sense of humor. I'm genuinely interested in everybody's lives, their own families, their own pursuits, their backgrounds, their knowledge. He's a man who just absorbs information and people and experiences. And I've witnessed him firsthand with his 5 children, his 10-year-old son, his wife, Melania, who's just an incredible first lady for all of us. Amazing. God bless her. We're all very lucky to have her leadership as well. And I've witnessed him with his 4 adult children and his 8 grandchildren. He's a family man. He is happiest when he's with his family. And that's his, that really is a happy place for him to be with his family. And so he's very generous, very kind, funny, compassionate. And people should really think about, when they see President Donald Trump, they should think about all the places that he was and could be, all the things he could be doing. The political motivators for many typical politicians, of which he's not one, Mercy, money, power, prestige, fame, he had all of that. And he and his family have sacrificed mightily in those categories for him just to serve. And the idea that he is there because he wants to be there, because he believes in this country, he believes in its people, he believes in its promise, is very liberating. And you see that when you're with him privately, you see it publicly. But I find him to be incredibly gracious, energetic. I mean, the greatest compliment you can get from Donald Trump is not, hey, that's brilliant, or that was really smart, or great job. It's, you're really high energy. At the campaign, I would tell the young staffers, if you see him coming around the corner, just start doing jumping jacks, because
so you're saying
high energy.
So you're saying if they say low energy blank, that's a bad thing.
It's a bad thing.
Okay, got it. We'll just keep out the names.
But he works harder than anyone, and he's smarter and works harder than any of us, and that's very uplifting. You really want to up your game when you're around him and do your best for him And that goes for so many. If you look at the folks in the White House, and I know you and your husband served in the White House, met in the White House.
It was very romantic.
Yes, it was very romantic. I remember you being pregnant with Viana, who I just saw and who's going to high school. But if many people who work in the White House, you know, so many were staring at gold mines, have given up their own businesses, their own lives, their privacy, because you want to serve this president in this country at this time, which is very fraught, but it's also very promising. You know, I try to look at it through the positive side of the ledger. So much is negative these days, and so much is automatic. What can I find wrong in this? And a bunch of troublemakers. Frankly, I just think if we looked at it more positively and look at all the promise and the opportunity we have for this country, people feel really optimistic many places where we go.
So let me ask you, how do you believe President Trump has impacted the conservative movement?
Well, I think by tomorrow this will be CPAC when he's here, no doubt. So every great movement, which the conservative movement is, of course, every great movement ends up being a little bit sclerotic and dusty after a time, and I think they need an infusion of energy. And in the case of candidate Trump and President-elect and nominee Trump, he went right to the grassroots and brought you along. He made people feel from the beginning they were part of this movement. And being part of a movement means you're not just witnessing a campaign externally, which is the way I think a lot of activists felt over the years at different periods of time, which is that they're just witnessing history rather than being a part of it. People felt really fully engaged. They felt like they had a seat at the table from the beginning. And I believe because it was such a tough competition in the Republican primary, you had 17 candidates, most of whom made their way through CPAC over the years, that he earned the nomination in a way that was bottom up instead of top down. He really replaced this fiction of electability with this revelation of electricity and brought people in. Also, I think Donald Trump, because he's not a legacy candidate, he's not a Bush or a Clinton, he's sort of the first candidate of his type, that non-politician, true outsider who's coming to shake up the system. That seems to me to be very relatable and resonant with CPAC, because CPAC, you know, the courage that so many of you show in your communities, in your places of work, in your places of worship, certainly on your college campuses, where you definitely feel like you're in the ideological minority, that kind of courage, that outsider status, is very much who Donald Trump is, and I believe how he got here. And I personally wanted to come here today as counselor, but also really as the former campaign manager, to thank you for everything you did, for the courage you showed, for the activity, whether you stood in line, came to a rally, drove seniors to the polls, got people engaged in a conversation about public policy. We really owe it all to you. Those margins of victories were slim in some of those states, but to have carried states for the first time in decades was truly remarkable. And I think it's a combination of Donald Trump and Mike Pence as the best messengers, quality candidates, and really the grassroots to helping deliver in that way. I just wanted to come and personally thank you.
You mentioned about the college students. There's so many college students here in this audience. What's your message for them to survive in terms of being in these more liberal institutions? How do they get their message out?
Several different ways. First of all, don't live online. Live in real time. I'm just astonished how many people live online. Facebook, Twitter, texting, emails. Remember, it's a mode of communication. It is not communication. It's not real life. So step aside, make sure people see something other than the top of your head, and live in real time, in the real world. Have a conversation with people, engage other folks. There are so many people who are out there who agree with you or don't realize that they agree with you or want to learn more about repealing, replacing Obamacare or tax relief or what it means to have school choice in charter schools, et cetera. So engage in those conversations. Also, know who you are and possess that confidence, and just tune out the naysayers and the critics in a way where you feel like you possess a certain patience and perspective that many of us in the bubble lack. And recognize also that 4 years, 8 years is a long time. It's much longer than the first 4 weeks. So keep that perspective. Join different clubs, start different clubs that don't exist. Go ahead and be bold, write letters to the editor, become a blogger, make your voices known, and be willing to hear the word no more than you say it. You will be rejected. Somebody else will get the job you wanted, or someone else will be the president of the club that you felt you deserved to be. But don't say the word no. Opportunity does not always knock twice. You have to make some of your own opportunities, and you have to go and grab those. And also, because I see a lot of old timers like me in the audience too, so I don't want to give them short shrift. Thank you for sticking with the conservative movement. Thank you for believing in a set of ideas and principles that are timeless beyond politics, beyond any one political candidate or party, which is far less important, frankly, than the ideas that you bring to bear. Converse with each other. Help each other out. I learned so much from our younger staffers, a great deal. Technology is their native tongue. They had these great experiences and great perspectives, and they learned from us. So go ahead and mentor folks and do that exchange of information and ideas. Be willing to have a lunch or a coffee with someone. Don't be too busy for other people is really what I would say. Don't be too busy for each other, because that is something also today that I find to be incredibly unfortunate.
Wise words from the counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway. We are so honored that she is with us again here at CPAC, a regular visitor here.
One piece of advice.
Absolutely.
I have one last piece of advice for women, just because I want to tell a story that everybody always begs me to tell. I've been telling it for a long time. Some of you may have heard it before. I often in my career literally didn't know how to express my value and ask for what I thought I deserved and I had earned. And so this is a long time ago story that still is enduring to this moment. And I remind myself of it almost every day. I was young in my career. My company was a year old. I was a CNN paid political analyst at the time, and somebody called from a speaking agency and said, hey, we have a request from this financial institution for you and Mark Mellman, Democratic pollster, obviously a man, to come and speak to us on September 28th about the elections. And I said, okay. And the man said, it's September 28th, you can each speak for 20 minutes, then we'll take 20 minutes Q&A, preview what you think will happen in the election, and talk to us a little bit about public policy. I said, oh, that sounds great. It'll be at the Mayflower Hotel, which I could see out my office window. I literally was a block and a half from there. And they said, what is your speaking fee? And I froze. I completely froze. Because for me, even with my law degree at the time, for me, free speech was not the First Amendment. It was, let's go call Kellyanne. She'll come. She'll talk for free. And I froze because I knew no matter what I said in return to the question of what is your speaking fee, what are you worth, what is your value to do this? No matter what I said, I was going to undercut myself. I was going to be that self-denying girl who grew up in that house of all women, a giver, not a taker. And so I froze and I thought, oh my God, what am I going to say? It's not his fault if I undercut my value. So having no idea how to assess my value for that particular speech, I took a line out of When Harry Met Sally, and I said, I'll have what he's having. And the man said on the other line, this is 20 years ago. This is 1996. I was 28 years old. I'm 50. You don't have to do the math. I just turned 50. 50 is like the new 49 and nothing better, let me tell you. I said, he said, excuse me? And I said, well, you said Mark Mellman and I are going to do the same thing, show up at the same time, give the same remarks. So I'll have what he's having. And the man said in 1996, having never gotten $1 to give a speech before, he said, oh, well, Mark requested $3,500. Would that be? And I said, that'll be fine. And I hung up the phone and I fell to the floor. I was so excited. So when in doubt, just say, I'll have what he's having. And indeed, you'll get it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so that is Kellyanne Conway, advisor to the president, really instrumental in Donald Trump's victory. And still, the mainstream media tries to marginalize her. Great story at the end. And the truth is, she said that story was advice for women. Well, I'll tell you what, anybody could take that advice. That's advice for anybody out there. You've got to, one, I think you should know your worth. and then shoot for about 25 or 30% higher than what you think your worth is if you come into an interview like that. All right, we are live at CPAC here at NRATV. I'm joined with my good buddy Bill Whittle here is with me, and it is so great to have Antonia Okafor with us, who is a great friend of the NRA. Antonia, thank you for coming on with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So just so everybody knows who you are, you've been instrumental in the campus carry movement and conservative causes. But before we get to that, what was your thoughts about Kellyanne Conway today?
Oh, I absolutely love her. The more I hear her speak and see her, the more I just tend to fangirl and love her even more. I think she's a great example of a conservative woman who's strong and who's successful. And I think it's unfortunate that the media tends to, bypass her when it comes to female empowerment. I think she's a great example of that.
Bill and I were talking about how the left-wing media tries to marginalize women, but that say the Republicans and conservatives marginalize women. I think nothing could be further from the truth, and in fact, it's the left-wing media that tries to marginalize Kellyanne Conway. Obviously, you're a woman. You got them coming at you from both sides. You're a minority and a woman, and a conservative. So
young.
They don't and guns. They don't know what to do with somebody like you.
Yeah, no, that is exactly what happens to me. It's, I get flack from all over, but it makes me stronger. It makes me be able to combat them and envy which way they try to attack me. And I think it helps other women and young people and minorities who don't think like what the media the mainstream media thinks that they should be thinking like.
Kellyanne Conway had said, don't live online, live in real time.
I love that advice.
And so, you said people attack you. I promise you, if there were liberals here, they won't come up to any of our faces and attack us because they're scared to do things like that. But they will attack you online. They'll get behind a keyboard and they got all the guts in the world.
Oh, yeah. Twitter. I mean, I love the mute button for Twitter. But, yeah, that is definitely when they want to talk about something, they will not talk. They won't say it to my face. They will definitely say it through any social media stream. And so, and that's part of it is that I try to bring that into the forefront of that these people are hypocrites, and they say that they're not racist or they're not sexist, but yet they're using racist and sexist language towards me because I don't think like them and I'm not doing what they want me to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say something about that. I got a chance to interview some young conservatives yesterday, young minority conservatives, and they're absolutely demonized. You can't be a woman if you vote for a Republican. You can't be Hispanic. You can't be black. Can't be any of these things. And this is from the so-called Party of Tolerance and Inclusion. These people have no idea how fascist and sexist they really are. I think they project all of that onto us.
Or you can't be a feminist and advocate for gun rights. I hear that all the time on college campuses. They always want to exclude the fact that self-defense is a form of female empowerment, and it's something that should be talked about more and included. But it's really an agenda, and that's when we expose it more because they don't want that part to be a part of female empowerment.
You bring up feminism, and it's interesting to me because there shouldn't really be a distinction between if feminism is fighting for women's rights, we should be fighting for all rights,
course.
everybody's rights.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so they bring up feminism as if conservatives are somehow against women and against the idea of feminism when really all conservatives want is the freedom for everybody to have the opportunity to do whatever they want in life, and as long as everyone has equal opportunity. That's the key to success.
It's opportunity of equality. People talk about equality, and most people don't realize there are two different kinds of equality, and they're mutually exclusive. There's equality of opportunity, which says that everybody should be legally the same, and no one should be held back, and no one should get special benefits, and everybody's going to run this race, and some people will run faster and slower, and they'll cross the finish line at different speeds. Some people will do better based on their talents and so on. But what the left wants is they want equality of result. They want everybody to cross the finish line at the same time, which has a couple problems if you think about it. If everybody has to cross at the same time, that means the whole race has to be run at the speed of the slowest runner. That's first of all. And secondly, every single other person has to be held back to the speed of the slowest runner.
My biggest fear is when you get into those kind of philosophies, societies will relate down to the lowest common denominator, which is exactly what you said. And that is the biggest problem of all, because if you start relating to the lowest common denominator, in many respects, I think you start to see what's going on in America today, where people get their news from TMZ, and they're walking by a Best Buy, and they see a headline on the news, and that's how they get their news instead of staying informed. And so, Antonia, you have made your career out of trying to inform people, and I think you've made such a great job of informing young people. What is the response you get when you go on to college campuses with your message?
Yeah, well, definitely. Even in Texas, people like to say, "Oh, well, you're in Texas. I'm sure you're in friendly grounds." No, I'm not. Especially when it comes to college campuses that are actually ruled by mostly leftist, liberal-leaning, academics. And so, a lot of the students, they follow suit when it comes to their professors, and their professors are anti-gun. And so when it comes to making sure that I talk to them about the facts, when I talk to them about concealed carry on campus, that it's really for people who are 21 years of age and older, who are permit holders, who have passed the background checks needed. Just like off campus, when they're educated about the facts, then they are very gung-ho about making sure that we're able to have that right, just like they have that right off campus.
Can I ask you something about that? I've done a bunch of colleges and high schools, and just like you, have run into incredibly left-wing audiences and professors. And every time I went into that situation, I thought, okay, my job basically here is to give people some information in a way that's not too threatening. It's kind of, self-deprecating and so on. But I realized after it was over that what I'd actually accomplished was I hadn't given them so much conservative principles as just shown them that I'm a human being and that I care about people, and I'm not this cartoon monster that they've printed out for us to be. And just having the ability to talk for an hour and have people realize, no, you're conservative and you believe in these things because you want women to be safe and equal, and because you want minorities to be able to defend themselves in these horrible neighborhoods and all the rest of it. When they find out you're a human being, they really change.
And I love that you talk about that because, like I said, I used to be a Democrat in college, and I remember that. And they still do, of course. The media will perpetuate, oh, you're Republican, you're conservative, they hate you, they're racist, they're sexist. But then I would realize that the more I talked to conservatives and Republicans in real life, that narrative didn't match. And so, like you were saying, that they're human beings and that they want opportunity. They just want it in a way that the government is not going to be telling them how to do it.
I knew some gay Republicans in Hollywood and in show business, and every single one of them said that it is much, much easier to be gay among Republicans than to be Republicans among liberals. Much easier.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Antonia Okafor, it is great to have you on set with us. Great to finally see you in person. Usually we're over our Skype connection, but thank you for coming on today. And you keep up the good work, all right?
Thank you so much.
All right, you got it. It is always great to have folks like Antonia come on and talk to us about these kinds of things. I want to bring in another young man. You got a microphone with you. Come in here. So this is what I was talking about. So does this guy to you, Bill, look like the fringe of America? Because that's what the mainstream media is telling us, that you're the fringe of America. Mike.
I'm obviously an average American kid. I'm very suddenly involved in this.
So tell me first, one, I love your shirt,
Thank you.
Socialism Sucks. Tell me your name.
I'm Aiden.
Aiden. And your last name, Aiden?
Mattis.
Mattis.
Piambino Mattis, but I give Mattis because it's shorter.
Okay, where are you from?
I'm from outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I'm a student at Penn State.
So there you go. Why don't you tell us what you're doing here?
I'm here with Turning Point USA, which is a student organization that promotes small government and capitalism. Sorry about my voice. It's a little hoarse right now.
All right.
But I'm vice president of the organization, and I came here with our president, actually, and our field director, Jonathan, who's over here. And we're here to represent the organization, which is all about educating students on small government, reversing the liberal indoctrination that happens in the school system up until you reach college age.
Couldn't have a better cause. So what college are you going to?
Penn State University.
Penn State. Okay, so at Penn State, I would imagine you are up against it as far as being a conservative at basically any college campus these days. What do you think when you see what's going on with the anti-free speech movement at colleges across America today?
That's actually a great question because just a couple weeks ago, it was a Monday.
That's what I get paid for, by the way.
It was a Monday, and there was a anti-Trump sort of protest going on at the main gates of the school, and I went down just to see what was going on, and I ended up talking to a couple of protesters because they were very, they were holding signs, and one held a sign in front of my face just because I was talking. Which is ironic. And I then got called a racist for saying Jesus was a Jewish person. I got called a racist because, basically because I was white and I was speaking. I wasn't allowed to talk. I was told I wasn't allowed to have an opinion because I'm a white male. I was told I'm not allowed to have an opinion because I'm Christian. I was told I voted for Trump, which I don't know how they would know that because I voted for Gary Johnson. But
we can talk after about that choice.
So you're the guy.
I was torn. I couldn't decide.
I understand.
I want to just take. I don't think he's an ordinary young person at all, and I don't think she is either. If you have any idea of what the actual atmosphere on these campuses is, you realize that these two people, among many others, have unbelievable moral courage. Unbelievable moral courage. And actually, it's come into physical courage now with the way these left-wingers are always so violent and so intimidating. But to go against the stream is really hard, and at this age especially, this is the social proof is what everybody else is doing, and everybody wants to do what everybody else is doing. It takes a lot of guts and a lot of courage.
I feel like they feel like they have permission now.
That's
like you're saying, is that
exactly
they can be against us because it's for the greater good. They can say that he's a racist because he's a white man and not be racist themselves for thinking that and for saying that.
Well, when you think about it, they have political cover from the media. They go out to these protests, and the media would make it look like these protesters, who really in many cases turned into rioters, thugs, and looters and the like. The media gives them political cover, and it's got to be upsetting. Here's my advice to you, though. Thrive off confrontation, and I don't mean violent confrontation. I mean confrontation. Thrive off it. Always be respectful when you're talking to these people, because they cannot come up with an argument. They will always fall back on emotion. You arm yourselves with facts. When you arm yourself with facts, you will be so far ahead of the folks on college campuses across America today.
Speaking of arming yourself with facts, it's been a real pleasure of mine. I did 3 videos for TPUSA, starting with Charlie. Yeah, just started 3. And I was talking with Charlie about it, and he said, well, what do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about safe spaces or free speech zones? And I said, Charlie, my experience is when I go to these colleges, these people don't know anything about economics at all. They call themselves socialists because they think it's fair. So let's do one on money. Let's do one on socialism. Let's do one on capitalism. Just little building blocks. And Charlie's organization, TPUSA, is really, really moving the needle. You may have the same experience as I do, and you may too. You ever go to like a Republican group or a Tea Party group, and you look out in the audience, and the average age is, like
us,
deceased. It's deceased. That's the average age. And to have an entire crop, if you'll pardon the expression, of young conservatives coming up, I have not seen this kind of young people anything like we see them in this
Well,
year.
the NRA in June is going to be actually sponsoring the Turning Point USA's Young Women Leadership Summit in June. And so I get to be speaking. Kellyanne Conway will be there, Wayne LaPierre. But I think it's because also with gun rights, with Second Amendment rights, that's something with free speech that goes really hand in hand. And a lot of college women particularly are interested in that. So I think it's going to be an interesting conference.
Do you two, question for both of you, since you guys spend so much time on college campuses, do you think that these people that are protesting, that you saw what happened at Berkeley, you know what your beliefs are, your values, and you're pushing conservative principles. Do you think they even understand what they're pushing, or are they just agitators and disruptors?
At first, I thought that that these were people that genuinely had positions and they held strong beliefs. And then I saw what happened at Berkeley, and it was clear that, to an extent, and I know that wasn't a lot of Berkeley students. There were also there were paid people there, and it was ridiculous. But essentially, I also got into a room with NAACP, hosted it at our college campus, and we had a discussion. It was on capitalism and its effects on the world. And out of everyone in that room, the only people who actually knew any economic theory were me and my friend Vinny.
That's it.
So we sat through this room talking about capitalism, talking about its effects, talking about, one girl was Justice for Palestine, and she brought up capitalism in Israel and how we need the BDS system to beat those Israelis. And of course, I explained to her that entire system is free market capitalism. And she didn't get it. She didn't know what I was talking about.
No, she doesn't understand.
I explained economic rationality to people. They didn't get it. I explained supply and demand, and these people didn't understand the basic concepts of capitalism. I can only imagine that extends to their ideas about socialism and other such
Well, I've asked
ideologies.
many times, do you know what socialism means? And they don't. And it's a simple answer. The government controls the means of production. That means the government controls everything. And they cannot answer that one simple phrase, the government controls the means of production. They have no idea. They think it's about fairness and everybody doing great and sliding down rainbows into a big pool of marshmallows.
Yeah, but here's the thing, though. They talk like socialists, but they act like conservatives. the whole idea of socialism is from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. We want more or less equal outcomes, and if you've got more, then we should take it from you and give it to somebody else. And I was at Oberlin College one night, and I said, how many of you socialists out there have cell phones? And they said, well, why do you want to know? I said, I'm not a Democrat, not going to steal them from you. Right. I just want to know. And so they what they did was they held up their phones, and I said, okay, socialists, bring them down. We're going to put them in a basket, and when we're done here, we're going to go to Cleveland, and we're going to liquidate $2,000 worth of electronics easily, and we'll go through the streets of Cleveland, and we'll hand out $100 bills to the homeless. We'll hand out $100 bills to homeless people, so bring them down. And all of a sudden, they're all William F. Buckley. They're rock-ribbed conservatives. Because when they're all about wealth redistribution when it's somebody else's wealth being redistributed to them, but when they have to give up something that they own to other people, they just freeze. They just don't have any idea what to say.
Yeah, they sure do. Hey, it was Aiden, right?
Yes.
Aiden, we appreciate you coming on today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
You keep up the good work, all right?
Yeah, we're really proud of you.
Cool. Here, I'll take that from you, I guess. I need two of them. I go double-fisted when it comes to microphones. Yeah. Oh, we have another guest. This is great. We get so many people working for us here. Mike Crispy, he's the executive director of New Jersey Young Republicans. Who ultimately wants to run for state office. Is Mike Crispy? Which one's Mike? Come on over here, Mike. So we're flying by the seat of our pants here. So, Mike Crispy, great to have you on. Thank you.
Nice to be with you.
You're dressed like a nice older Republican.
Thank you very much.
Not a young
Thank
Republican.
Hey, good to meet you, Mike. Come on.
Thank you, guys.
So you live in New Jersey?
Yes, I live in Morris County in Cedar Knolls.
All right, beautiful place. I'm from New York originally, so I know it well. What brings you to CPAC?
I'm here to support Donald Trump, Mike Pence, some people who have been inspirations to me over the past couple of years and have really inspired me to get involved. I was supporting Donald Trump pretty early on. A big part of my belief is, especially in the state of New Jersey, is that we need to expand the Second Amendment, and that's kind of how I got talking to you guys and the NRA. And Donald Trump has always stood steadfast on that, as has Mike Pence and other conservatives. That's really what's driven me.
Boy, when you talk about the Second Amendment in New Jersey and what's going on there, and people getting arrested for coming over from Pennsylvania, and
Yep.
you having to have the governor pardon these people because you have a domestic violence victim who had a concealed handgun license gets arrested, and they want to throw the book at her. How do you get the New Jersey legislature on board to change some of these laws, because they've gone off the deep end?
It is really challenging, and even with, Chris Christie, who we've had as governor, I don't think he's done, all of his part that he could to make influential change in that. The state legislature is overwhelmingly Democratic, and it's funny because the state of New Jersey, county-wise, there are more Republican counties than there are Democratic counties, but kind of like America, it's a couple of key cities like Newark and Trenton that kind of tilt New Jersey in the opposite balance. So I think that getting young conservatives with a optimistic, rejuvenated message, the party is pretty old, and getting younger, more active voices will lead to influential change, I hope.
All right. Well, I hope you're right about that, because and I think the way to do it, when you talk about these liberal cities, the only way to do it is to spur the economy. But when you have liberal leaders running these cities, they don't know how to spur the economy. You spur the economy, I promise you, you will bring more conservatives into your city who want to stand up for themselves and succeed for themselves. But, Bill, we've got cities in America today, all the cities you see suffering from violence, from Baltimore, Memphis, Detroit, Chicago.
Democratically run for 70, 80, 90 years,
Newark.
120.
Newark. Thank you.
They haven't had a Republican mayor or city commission in a century. And these places are getting more and more disgusting, more and more dangerous, more and more violent, and more hopeless every day.
So Mike Crispy wants to run for state office.
That's right.
So just on what you said alone on the Second Amendment, we got to get you in. Are you running yet? Are you?
No, the election actually will be in about 2 years, 2019. I might run for freeholder in between there, but I'm looking to run in 19, lay the grassroots, get support, and I really think it's wide open. And the people who are incumbents right now, they're just not getting it done for the people. They're serving their special interests.
Is it a Democrat you have in?
Yeah, there are two Democratic assemblymen. Been about 4,000 votes short in the district, and I really think that with a new message, not a 70-year-old or 75-year-old who's been running and losing consistently.
All right, I'm going to give you. I love giving advice on this show, right?
I love getting advice.
As a guy who ran for Congress, I lost, but I came pretty good against an incumbent in a primary. The key to a state house race, you cannot do it in a congressional race to walk every house. You just can't do 1 million homes. But in a state house race, you got to hit the pavement, and you go to every Republican voter and you knock on their door, not once, but 4 times. You hit those Republican voters 4 times, I promise you can overcome the 4,000 votes. And it's doable. You just got to get out there and hit the pavement.
And
I'm going to get out there. It's worth it.
College campuses too. I mean, in the end, it comes down to grassroots efforts of being there, talking to the students, not on social media, not online, but actually talking to them face to face. That's how we change people, and that's how we change our schools.
That is it.
That's
hey,
right.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you very much for having me, guys, and keep up all the great work you do.
You got it.
Good luck.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Appreciate you coming on. Okay. So that's a great indication or a great example of the kind of people that you have coming here. And I can't keep saying it enough. You have the mainstream media that has called us the extreme right of the party, the fringe of the party. They will do everything to disparage the good people here. I have not seen one wingnut here, but I've looked at protests, I've looked at riots, and I see dozens, if not thousands, of wingnuts off the handle, mentally incompetent people, and I have not seen one of those people here.
They're turned away at the gates. You know, we have a couple of flags here and a lot of patriotic bunting. And when you get these kind of liberals coming into a room like this, their skin bursts into flames. You know, if there's any sign of the Constitution or flags, they just erupt into flames and they don't know what to do.
You know, you talk about patriotic garb. Hey, William Temple, come over here. We got patriotic garb. Talk about patriotic garb. How are you, sir?
Better than I deserve, my wife says.
All right, so from Brunswick, Georgia.
Yes, sir.
I love to get them.
Well, you know, Thomas Jefferson said, the beauty of the Second Amendment is that it won't be needed until they come to take it. And being 280 years old, I'm really surprised they've come to take it. And you have to fight against us now.
Well, certainly they are coming to take it, and they are going now from state house to state house across America, and that's where the war is going to be played.
Well, they took my 69 caliber Brown Bess away from me. They won't let me bring it into the city.
No,
it's because it'll punch a hole in a wall, that's why.
You know what's interesting on that topic is yesterday we were coming home from dinner, and I thought to myself, you know, for the first time I almost felt naked. I carry a little 380 with me. I'm not fancy about anything, but I carry it in my pocket. And I'm right outside Washington, D.C., and strict gun control laws here in Maryland. I don't have a firearm with me. And I'll tell you, some of the things that we say on this program, the liberal left hates it, and you never know. And I think everybody should carry a firearm. Here, they have taken away my Second Amendment right because I live in Texas, and that's wrong.
Well, and was this a flintlock?
It's a matchlock.
Matchlock.
Yeah.
Oh, got the
yeah,
smoking
it's got
little thing.
Well, then even yesterday, though, the federal judge from Maryland who said that the military-style guns are not part of our constitutional rights.
That's right.
The Second Amendment protects every other right, and once you lose the Second Amendment, you've lost it all. I talked to a Russian who was at CPAC last year, and they wanted to know values voter, and they wanted to know what's the whole thing about the Second Amendment. And I said, are your people armed? And they said, no. Yeah. I said, can the government pretty much tell you what to do? Yeah. And I said, well, that's what the Second Amendment's about. But we're the country that says you have to be armed. And if you're not armed, you won't be able to maintain your rights. And Patrick Henry made it very clear that we take up arms because we do not have the vote. That's what he said.
Well, he was obviously a very smart man. Many of them. Sir, I want to thank you for coming on today.
You're welcome.
And great words for us. We are expecting. I'm a big fan of this guy. This is the governor of Wisconsin,
Me too.
Scott Walker.
Me too.
What he has done in Wisconsin is strictly amazing. Let's go to the stage now and listen in on Scott Walker.
One walker beats 14 runners. That was one of my favorite bumper stickers years ago after we won our battle against the big government union bosses. You might remember at the time there were 14 state Senate Democrats in our state who fled the state and went to Illinois to help the special interest groups organize and then eventually ship in thousands of protesters from across the country. In fact, at one point, there were over 1,000 people occupying our state capitol. If you remember, the Occupy movement didn't start in Wall Street. It started on my street in Madison, Wisconsin. At the time, they didn't just limit themselves to our state capitol. They actually went to the executive residence, and eventually they found their way to our family home in Wauwatosa, which is more than an hour away from our state capitol. I had death threats. My wife, Tonette, had threatening messages. My sons, Matt and Alex, who were in high school at the time, literally were targeted on Facebook. But they didn't limit it just to us. They went around events around the state. In fact, they disrupted and interrupted, I should say, the dedication of a new welcome center in our state line. They interrupted a ceremony for the 100-year celebration of one of our great state parks. They even interrupted the anniversary of one of our historic technical colleges. But the tipping point was probably more than anything was the day when a bunch of protesters, ironically enough, dressed as zombies. Don't ask me why, but that particular day they were the Walking Dead, I guess. They were zombies. They were protesters who showed up and interrupted. I should say it differently. They disrupted a law enforcement torch run for the Special Olympics. At that time, it was a turning point indeed, because the people in our state, no matter where they stood on the issues, could see that the protesters were not like them. I mean, who would mess up an event for Special Olympic athletes? It was just remarkable. But as I thought about that, thinking about speaking here today, I'm reminded of many of the stories I see these days around the country where protesters come en masse to try and disrupt public meetings, where angry mobs come to college campuses and try to stop people from speaking, where defenders of the status quo try to stop people who ran on an agenda from doing what they said they would do during the campaign. And as I hear these stories, I think to myself, been there, seen that. You know, from our standpoint, it's exactly why we've been talking not only here today, but to people over the last few months all across this great country, reminding our leaders about what happened in Wisconsin, about why we did what we did, and most importantly, about what's happened since. So let me share with you a little bit here. In fact, I was reminded of late about that just 2 weeks ago, or tomorrow. So less than 2 weeks ago. It was 2 weeks ago tomorrow that I saw the video of protesters trying to stop the new U.S. Secretary of Education from going into a public school just up the way here in the District of Columbia. And so I called Betsy DeVos, who's a good friend of mine, and I said, you know what? Been there, done that. You remember in the midst of our protests, the protesters, as outrageous and radical as they were, they literally glued the door shut to an elementary school where I was going to come and read to the children. Now, the good news is that school was not to be deterred. They actually took the doors off the hinges, and we were able to read to the kids. But it was a vivid reminder about what we learned in Wisconsin, and that is to do what you said you were going to do, to go big, to go bold, to actually follow through on the promises you made throughout the campaign. You know, it's not only conservatives and Republicans who like that. What we found in Wisconsin is that independents and, yes, even some discerning Democrats like it when you do the things you say you're going to do. And so we've tried to apply that going forward. It's kind of interesting. It works on both political and on policy fronts. Politically, even though it's not just the fact that I've won 3 elections for governor, although I did. In our state, we not only won the 3 elections, but our Republicans in the legislature have actually gained seats in 12, in 14, and again in 16. Why? It's because common sense conservative reforms work. They actually work, and the people responded to them. In our state, we've seen over the last year more people were employed in my state than ever before, ever. We have the lowest unemployment rate since January of 2001. We have one of the highest percentages of people overall in the workforce. But beyond that, on economic and fiscal policy, we see that even though we inherited a $3.6 billion budget deficit, our state now has budget surpluses. And we have one of the few state systems that has a fully funded pension system. And we have one of the lowest outstanding overall long-term debt. And so now, because of those economic and fiscal reforms actually working, the successes have led to a positive budget, and in turn, we have what we call a reform dividend. Remember the peace dividend years ago under Reagan? We have a reform dividend. And so I want to spend just a couple minutes telling you about what we're doing with that. First off, we're reinvesting it like a good company would in the things that got us there in the first place. So top of the list, taxpayers. We're going to help lower the burden on the hardworking taxpayers. In fact, so much so with this budget, the total amount, cumulative impact of our tax relief over 8 years will be exceeded $8 billion. That's cutting taxes by over $8 billion. As we promised, property and income taxes will be lower in 2018 than they were in 2010. And you'll like this, we're actually eliminating an entire tax. For the first time since 1931, there will be no state tax on our property tax bills in Wisconsin. Beyond taxes, though, we're investing in our workforce. Probably like a lot of employers here, I hear from people all across my state that say, we've got jobs, we just don't have enough people to fill them. So we're investing in our workforce, and we're doing it in a way that demands better performance and more credibility and transparency from education and higher education. In fact, how many college students do we have here today? Let's see your hands and hear from you. Right? Okay, how many of those college students are from Wisconsin? Do I hear any of the Wisconsin? Okay, the Wisconsin students will appreciate this because we've frozen tuition in our state 4 years in a row, and in this budget, we're actually going to lower tuition by 5% at all of our campuses. Lower tuition, higher standards, and actual free speech for everyone, including conservative students, faculty, and speakers at all of our University of Wisconsin campuses. And the third big thing we're doing is about helping people transition from government dependence to true independence through work. You know, more than 20 years ago, my state, Wisconsin, led the way with welfare reform with a great leader by the name of Tommy Thompson. He was our governor back then. Today, we're taking it another giant step forward with something we call Wisconsin Works for Everyone. It's a simple concept. Everyone who is able to work has to be employed at least 80 hours a month if they want to get benefits like food stamps and housing vouchers. And for those that can't find work, we require them to be employed in job training. And now with a new president and a new Congress, we can actually go forward with our plan to ensure that everyone seeking welfare can actually pass a drug test. You see, it's simple. We want to help our fellow citizen, but we understand that public assistance should be a trampoline, not a hammock. We ensure that everyone who is able to work is empowered to work and required to work, because true freedom and prosperity don't come from the clumsy hand of the government. They come from empowering people to live their own lives and control their own destinies through the dignity that's born of work. And all those things show that conservative reforms work. But I just want to end with this. I want to make a challenge to each of you here today to keep moving forward. Don't stand still. Keep moving forward. 6 years ago, I remember a reporter asked us in the midst of all the protests in our capital, a reporter asked me, don't the protesters have a right to be heard? I said, absolutely. They absolutely have a right to be heard. This is America. Anybody can say or do what they want about the government. They can challenge the government no matter who's in power. But I then said to that same reporter that I wasn't going to let the noise of the protesters drown out the voices of the majority of people who had elected us to do the things that we were going to do. Sadly, in Washington, it is common practice to ignore the will of the voters. For too long, the media and the status quo defenders spend their time listening to the noise of the protest and the rhetoric of the pundits. That's why I call Washington 68 square miles surrounded by reality. My plea to you here today is to not get caught up in Washington, to not forget the voters, to not ignore the people who live in reality all across this country every single day. Don't forget them. Don't forget their families. Don't forget their neighbors. Fight for them. Fight for liberty. Fight for freedom. Fight for America. Let's keep it up. Thank you so much. God bless you. God bless this country. Have a great day.
So that is Scott Walker, the governor of Wisconsin, who in no short order is really very, very responsible for the election of Donald Trump. When you think of Wisconsin being put in play and what Scott Walker put in place as far as the ground game in Wisconsin, you know, Donald Trump for so long was criticized that he didn't have a ground game in any of these states. In Wisconsin, there was one. With all the recall elections with Scott Walker, they needed a ground game there to get Republicans elected in what has typically been a very Democratic state. Paul Ryan also, as far as getting Donald Trump elected, Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, was very instrumental in helping to get Scott Walker elected. And you can see by the passion in his speech there that he is an absolute crowd favorite. Scott Walker is a guy that really all conservatives can learn from because he's an everyday guy that speaks to the American people much like Donald Trump does. I want to come over here, and I'm going to get up here, and we're going to come over to this camera where we have a very sweet young lady with a Trump Make America Great Again hat. Let's see, where are we going here? Right here. Let's move back so I can see your whole outfit. Come back here. Come back here. We're going to come back here. There's the Trump Make America Great Again. Now your name is Millie, is that right?
Uh-huh.
So, Millie, how excited are you to be here?
I am so excited. This is my first CPAC ever. I mean, I just can't contain it.
Well, I'm so glad you're here with us, Millie.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So what are you looking forward to seeing?
I'm looking forward to meeting new people, going to the hub, watching all these speeches, especially the one that Kellyanne Conway said. It was so inspiring.
What did you think? Now, you're a young lady, and you have a great future ahead of you. What did you think of what Kellyanne Conway said?
I mean, I think it is a little hard for women in the world, but we can't just blame it on men, or we can't just say everyone's racist, you know?
Well, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of women out there that blame me for a lot of stuff, but it has nothing to do with politics. But that's another story, Millie. That's another story.
Thank you.
All right, so when you look at what's going on, are you going to get to see Donald Trump tomorrow?
I hope. Well, I'm going to see him do his speech, but I don't know if I'll meet him.
All right, now what state are you from?
I'm from Virginia.
You're from Virginia, so that's a very important state when it comes to elections.
Oh, yes.
Are you staying here or do you drive in for the day?
I'm driving.
You're driving? Wait a second. You're driving.
Actually, my mom's driving.
I know.
But I will soon.
All right, so when you looked at the election, did you think Donald Trump was going to win? I mean, really, did you
I knew he was going to win. From the moment he said, Donald Trump, will run for president, I knew he was going to win.
So you remember that day he came down the escalator?
Wait, he came down an escalator?
Oh, the first day he said, I'm going to run for president.
Oh,
He
yeah.
came down the escalator at Trump Tower. You remember that day? No, maybe not.
I remember when he was on a stage saying I was going to run for president, but I don't remember him on an escalator.
Well, I'll tell you, do you remember the day he won?
Yes.
Because that was an important day.
That was a huge day.
Well, Billy, I'll tell you what, you are so great. You are going to be a great activist for us. Oh, what do we got here on the back? Now, wait a second. Is this a Donald Trump doll, I guess you call it? Where'd you get that from?
My friend Mr. Quinn gave it to me.
Mr. Quinn, how old are you?
I'm 11.
You're 11 years old, and you are this involved. It is great. I can only imagine the force you were going to be when you were an adult.
Oh, thank you. I'll be in the Oval Office one day.
All right, Millie. Thanks, kiddo.
Have a nice day.
All right, we'll see you later. There you go. Bill Whittle, what do you think of little Millie there?
I think we need to lower the age of the presidency requirements. I mean, I think I'd rather have that 11-year-old president than anybody I've seen running on the Democratic side.
I'm telling you.
We're all gonna be working for her someday.
I guarantee it. So 11 years old, boy, and her passion is awesome. And that's what I love to see about this place is the passion that people have.
And so many young people, Grant. I mean, this is the big, giant concern, right? The mega concern is, are we making enough new conservatives, or is this an idea that's just getting older and grayer and dying off? And you know, it was pretty bleak looking for a while, but I mean, I cannot believe the number of young people I've seen here, and they're all on fire, and they're all really proud of themselves. And I've heard from many of them that this new generation, the people who will vote first in 2020, are just naturally more conservative than their older brothers.
You know, I've often said about myself that I have to harness my anger. I get so frustrated and angry sometimes with the direction this country's going. For 8 years, we had to live under Barack Obama, and I get fired up. It's a different time now, and there really is more of a positive vibe here. There are certainly things we can get angry about. But the positive vibe is refreshing for me. Coming from a guy, Bill, I need positive vibes in my life.
And me too. And seeing not just Millie, but all the rest of the young people is tremendous. You know, these kids were mocked, ridiculed, threatened, bullied before the election, and now at least they get to say, well, you know, who turned out being right and whose ideas are in ascendance now. We've said it before a bunch of times on the show, Grant. This is a window. We have 4 years, maybe only 2 years, to get things done and to kind of replant those seeds and reintroduce Americans to America. But the quality of the young people here and the number, especially the number, it's unbelievably encouraging to me.
Yeah, it sure is. Scott Walker just got off stage. His influence over conservatives, the Republican Party, I think really is understated. I had great hopes for him. I will admit, right off the bat, Scott Walker was my guy.
Mine too.
And in many respects, not to disparage Scott Walker, I don't know if he could live up to the superhero hype that was created about him. And so when he got on stage, he didn't have the same firebrand that Donald Trump had. And I think it was tough for him to almost live up to it. Because I thought he was going to go all the way.
I have to tell you, Walker dropped out pretty early, obviously, and I really did wonder the entire election if he'd had more money and more resources, if he'd stayed into the final 3 or 4, I think he really could have been amazing. But here's why. I think the reason Wisconsin went to Trump was not just because Scott Walker got out and you know, pounded flesh for him, pounded the pavement and pressed the flesh, I guess, for him. Scott Walker turned Wisconsin from a catastrophe into a trophy in a year. Yeah. He did it in a year.
Going through recall elections.
Oh, my God. And they had this tremendous budget deficit, and 1 year later, Wisconsin's running a surplus. And I think the people of Wisconsin finally had a chance to see what people in California haven't, which is if you put a Republican in there, you're going to see some benefits and the economy's going to grow. And
you know, here's the other thing. When you talk about conservative principles, Republican policies in many respects, and what happened with Scott Walker taking on the unions. Now, here you have a traditionally Democratic state. Scott Walker comes on. He says, I'm going to take on the unions. Now, normally that is a death sentence in a Democratic state.
Yeah, and not just a political death sentence either. There's some bad people out there.
You better believe it. And so that takes guts. So he fights back the unions. And when you think about unions today and what they mean for freedom, really they signify anti-freedom, because in many respects in unions, you have to know somebody or be related to somebody to even get into the union to get a job.
Yeah, and you know, GM basically went bust because my understanding was they were losing a couple of $1,000s on every car they sold because their union obligations were so high. They had these contractual obligations that were so high, and the union didn't seem to care if the company went out of business because their demands were so high. And that's pretty much what they did.
So this now gets into everything we're seeing with the talk on trade. And so Donald Trump, I agree with him on many things, and I will always be honest, I don't agree with Donald Trump on all things. On trade, he wants to tax foreign goods coming in, especially goods coming in from Mexico. I think it's the wrong idea. He wants to punish companies that leave the United States. I think that's the wrong idea. I think what we need to get back to is making America such a great place to do business where labor isn't overly expensive. Yes, you can pay a worker a good wage, but it's not overly expensive, where the taxes are not overly high, where the regulations are not overly burdensome, and make it where the incentive is to stay in America because you can compete. Consider this. You have Chinese tires. Barack Obama did this with Chinese tires. He said we have too many Chinese tires coming in, so they ended up putting a tax on Chinese tires so American companies could compete. What ended up happening was we spent $1.1 billion more on tires in America because of the tax on Chinese tires. The only one lining their pockets were maybe corporate executives. It certainly wasn't going back into the 1,200 jobs that were saved for $1.1 billion, and you are talking now $900,000 a job that was saved. It doesn't make any sense. And so think China can send over tires, and they can still sell them cheaper than Americans can make them here. They're sending them in shipping containers over here, and yet it's still cheaper. We've got to be doing better about enabling companies to do well in America.
Well, one thing that we may see that may really change the equation quickly is this. If you want to make a widget, it's a tire, it's a car, whatever. You want to make a widget, you've got three things you have to deal with. The cost of the raw materials, they're pretty much the same across the world. The cost of the labor, which is much, much cheaper in China, and the cost of the energy to build it. Now, we have so much energy under our feet. The genius of American petroleum engineers has generated so much petroleum, natural gas under our feet. After 8 years of Obama basically saying, no energy for you, if we can get to that energy, our lower energy costs can offset their lower labor costs, and we can find a way to get a little closer in parity as far as the prices are concerned.
Yeah, and so Barack Obama clearly, I don't even think it was all about the environment for him.
Of course not. No, of course not.
It was a war on big energy. He hated everything to do with big energy. He hated everything to do with oil. When you see the explosion of natural gas and the prices of your utilities coming down because of natural gas exploration, Barack Obama didn't care. And when he says he's the champion for poor people, when you think of your utility prices rising because of a war on energy, that hurts poor people the most. You think a rich guy cares if his natural gas bill for his house goes up $50? No, but a poor person certainly does.
It's the end of the world. And he's been that way. He's been that way for forever. You can tell about his actions rather than what he says. But energy is civilization. Energy is what makes civilization. It's the difference between having a washing machine and having to go down to the river every day and carry these huge buckets and come back and scrub them by hand and throw your entire life away on these menial tasks. And for him to be so anti-energy is just an indication of this kind of, you're exactly right, I'm not going to be affected by it, and my millionaire supporters aren't going to be affected by it, but we get to talk about how virtuous we are because we're against fracking. Fracking has made this country unbelievably energy rich, and it's an extremely clean fuel as well.
So you think about what's going on in other states. New York, for one, wants to raise the price of a pistol permit from $140 to $370. That is not, or Connecticut this is, Daniel Malloy in Connecticut. That is not going to affect the millionaire who lives in Greenwich, Connecticut that wants a pistol permit. But if you live in Hartford or Bridgeport, and many people don't understand that Hartford and Bridgeport are overrun with crime. There is crime in Connecticut. Those folks will be hurt the most who need a pistol permit the most, going from $140 to $370. That's a week's salary for some people.
There's a solar plant just outside of Las Vegas, and it's huge, 3 gigantic mirrors, and you can see it from hundreds of miles away. And this was touted as the very big thing. You know, we're going to have this giant solar plant. Turns out, Grant, the electricity from that plant costs 4 times. It costs 4 times more than it would have from either an oil or a gas-fired plant.
Well, somebody who knows a lot about that, and we talk about energy. You want to know about a guy who's got energy? Kurt Schlichter with Town Hall.
How you doing?
You got energy, baby, don't you?
I do. I'm ready. I'm powered up. Here from California, the home of, expensive solar power.
Yep.
Alternative energy. That is the alternative to cheap, efficient energy. We have plenty of hydraulic. Oh, wait. No, we don't.
Yeah. Hey, so what do you got planned on the agenda for you guys today? You writing a ton of stuff?
I'm wandering aimlessly.
Yeah, me too.
Getting sucked in whenever.
And you wandered right to our booth, and it's great to have you here.
Well, it's great to be here.
What was your response so far this morning and seeing everybody walking around, Kurt?
Oh, I love it. It's like Woodstock for me. I'm like I'm a lawyer in real life, so anytime I can go around and not be bombarded with young associates asking me to, is this discovery right? Can we do this motion for summary judgment? I'm very, very happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you're here, is there one speaker you're looking forward to hearing from?
Oh, jeez. I just like being with the people. I like being able to meet, seeing Larry Arnn over there, for instance, one of the foremost constitutional scholars in America, and just to have him right there and be able to pigeonhole him and bore him for 10 minutes with questions, that's great.
Kurt, you've covered, obviously, the presidency at great length. Donald Trump was not really a fan favorite here when he came last year. I think
certainly not by me.
What do you think? I mean, I'm sure the reception will be great for him tomorrow, but this really isn't his base crowd.
No, but I was anti-Trump early on. I thought, what are we doing? This isn't an ideological conservative like I'm used to. Then he won, and I said, well, it's either him or Hillary, like trying to decide between social diseases, and it's. and this guy has surprised me. And what he surprised me with is by putting in effect the most conservative cabinet I've seen
Absolutely.
ever. Rex Tillerson? Are you kidding me?
No, absolutely.
Mad Dog Mattis? Instead, the last guy we had, his nickname should have been Hugs.
Mattis alone was worth the Trump win, and
Oh my gosh.
every pick he has for the cabinet, I like him better and better and better. And that's a pattern. It's not just we gave you Mattis. It's like all across the board. These guys they're gonna roll back the EPA, going to roll back energy, they're going to roll back all the stuff. Mattis is going to send out a couple signals, not only to the Iranians and the Chinese, but to the American military that we get to go fight again. This is not about social engineering anymore.
I recently retired from the Army after 28 years active reserve service. And the morale was so low when you're focusing not on winning wars. I mean, we've been fighting these bandits for 15 years and haven't had a decisive victory. That's a real problem. And, to focus on nonsense, social engineering, when transgender integration becomes the most important part of your military strategy rather than having the capabilities to meet and defend an enemy, it's ridiculous.
And finally, we have some relief that way. Hey, I want to bring in a very special guest. With you guys.
Okay.
Sheriff David Clark.
Oh, my goodness.
Milwaukee
There he
County.
is.
Sheriff Clark, it's great to have you on the program. Come on in here. I'm going to have you hold that. It's great to see you, my friend.
It's a pleasure to be here.
This is a great friend of the NRA. I'm going to stand up here. You're still a little taller than me. And I don't have my
right
hat,
in Wisconsin.
So, look, we just heard Scott Walker talk. And he's got to be a close friend of yours, putting up the fight in Wisconsin.
Yeah, he's a very good friend. He started out in the state legislature, and then he was the county executive that came in the same year I became the sheriff, so 2002. We were the only conservatives in county government, so we were allies. We had each other's back. Then, of course, he went on to become the governor of the great state of Wisconsin, so I lost my only ally in county government, so now I'm fighting the fight by myself, but, I'm up for it.
You sure are, and, we talk about gun rights, and you've been on the program many times before. You're under a battle. You are one of the staunchest supporters of the Second Amendment, and you got a guy like Chief Ed Flynn in Milwaukee. Is there any way to even work with him? He blames CHL holders for the rise in crime in Milwaukee, and I about fell out of my chair.
Yeah, he's in deep with the Ford Foundation and that anti-gun group. Mike Bloomberg, he sits, and the mayor of Milwaukee sits on a couple of those boards. It's a shame. What we're really talking about is subculture behavior in the black community. Most of the victims of this violence are black. In the Milwaukee ghetto, most of these suspects are black. They will not address the dysfunctional culture of the underclass, not the entire black community. And I got to make this clear because the left sits out there hanging on every word that I say to try to contort it. So I want to make it clear it's the subculture, the black underclass with their dysfunctional behaviors like having kids out of wedlock, multiple kids. I mean, anybody can, any woman could get pregnant, and you would call it what you want. But to have 3, 4, and 5 kids, you cannot afford. The fathers leave. We're talking about school failure. That's another dysfunctional aspect of this culture. We're talking about staying out of the workforce, all right, not staying gainfully employed and moving up like we all did. You start a job and you get educated in job training, you go on to reach your God-given potential. We're talking about questionable lifestyle choices like gang involvement, drug and alcohol abuse. Those are the characteristics of the black underclass. It's cultural rot, and it is time in this country. It is time for black political officials and black leaders. And Obama had a tremendous opportunity to do this. He'd have been a great spokesperson, but he went progressive instead. But it is high time that black political leaders stand up, shun and shame these behaviors in the way that they know they need to. They don't have the moral courage. That's the problem. So this stuff continues to fester.
It seems to me that they end up coddling the criminals. And for political gain, I have heard more city leaders of liberal cities, including Milwaukee and Chicago and St. Louis, say that being proactive in policing amounts to racial oppression. Now, I can say that's ridiculous, but, I'm a 48-year-old white guy. My voice is not nearly as powerful as your, Sheriff. You are in law enforcement. You are a black man. You talk to these communities on a daily basis. Racial oppression, proactive policing?
Yeah, it's part of that craziness from the progressives, really. But, I talk to black people every day that live in these struggling cities, and I'm talking about all across this country because I've gotten a chance to crisscross this country over the last couple of years. talking to black folks. You know, I grew up in Milwaukee, and you know what? Black folks will tell you silently, hey, we need the police, we support the police, we respect the police. And polls bear that out. There have been several polls done, and not by right-wing pollsters either, that have shown that in excess of 60% of blacks polled said, yes, we support the police and we need the police. So this is that small minority of people on the progressive side, aided by a liberal mainstream media who is nothing more than a propaganda wing for leftist ideology. And so it's a shame because, like I said when I started out talking to you, the overwhelming number of people who are victimized by crime disproportionately are black people, good law-abiding black people, black children, youngsters, killed, city of Chicago, 11, 12, 13 years old, shot and killed in a gun shootout in a neighborhood. So the president has made it very clear, law and order is going to return to this country in the American ghetto and these struggling urban centers. The rule of law will prevail. The police are going to get the support that they need. The police have kind of been knocked on their heels over the last couple of years because of this these attacks, this anti-police rhetoric that is, and Obama's been an echo chamber for that.
You know, Sheriff, we see the attacks on police from the left. I believe the anti-cop rhetoric is at a level we have never seen before in American history. We have an officer in Whittier, California, who was recently killed. The man who killed him was a multiple violations of parole, a grand theft auto car thief. This guy should never have been on the streets, and yet we now have an officer dead because we were weak on crime in California.
Sure, and we like to highlight the ones where an officer's killed by a career criminal, and I get that. I mean, I've been a cop all my life. This is a very dangerous job, but we volunteer to do this. But you know what you just mentioned? These career criminals out on the street are killing, maiming, intimidating good law-abiding black people every day. And we don't hear so much about it. We just hear the numbers, right? Chicago, 742 homicides last year, near record high, but they have no faces and they really have no names. So I think that is just the tip of the iceberg. And at some point, because we're in full bore with these crazy social engineering projects. That's what they are. The academia in this country, they live in ivory towers. They come up with these crazy ideas on how to deal with crime. They shove it down the throats of police officers and say, go implement this plan, this, officer friendly and engage in dialogue with criminals, all this crazy stuff. We're seeing the fruits of that. This has been a disaster. It's been a disaster for good law-abiding black people and white people and brown people. But like I said, blacks are overrepresented. This stuff has to stop. This crap has to stop. It does not work.
In Chicago, the police chief there is touting ShotSpotter as going to solve all the crime. I'm not saying it's not a bad tool. This is a technology. It'll sense when a gunshot goes off, and I guess they can dispatch police to the area. A great tool. He's touting it as the solution. I honestly believe the solution is putting more officers on the street, let them proactive police, and once you catch a criminal, put them in jail and keep them there for a while.
Yeah, I call them remedies because whenever you do something, there's going to be some reaction on the other end that may be unintended. So Thomas Sowell, a guy that I admire, have met, is one of my mentors. He talks about these in terms of remedies, and we need multiple remedies. One of them is more law enforcement officers. There's no doubt about that. But we also need the black community as a whole, like I said, to start to engage in self-criticism. All right, I know that's not in vogue. You can't criticize blacks, each other. I'm talking about. You can't criticize the president because he's black. BS. Okay, you can't. But they don't have a hard time criticizing me, the left. But the other thing too
me
is
either, by the way, sure.
The other thing is, more police, more people, career criminals kept in prisons for longer periods of time. The left does not believe in jails and prisons as an effective crime control tool. It is an effective crime control tool. So, just a change in philosophy. But ShotSpotter, quickly on ShotSpotter.
Yeah.
Look, I am a proponent of the use of technology in law enforcement. But technology is just a force multiplier. It does not take the place of more boots on the ground. These cities have cut back on police hiring. They've cut back on police budgets. I know my budget's been cut tremendously over the last 10 years. So ShotSpotter is only effective if you have an officer you can deploy quickly to that scene. If there's no cops available because they're all on some sort of 911 call, the shot spotter's ineffective.
Sheriff, let me ask you, when you talk about the war on cops and everything going on, and Chicago, what's going on there, you got many police departments where top brass are really putting officers with handcuffs on their backs, right? Would you tell your child to go into policing, your niece or nephew to go into policing today?
Definitely not. Definitely not. Not today. That might change. I think it will change after 4 years of Donald Trump, who has the greatest respect for law enforcement officers.
Boy, that's sad, though, Sheriff, isn't it?
Sure it is. And that's one of the things that the left doesn't think about. Who are we going to get to do this job? You know what's going to happen over time? Because this has happened before. They're going to have to lower hiring standards.
Yeah, that's right.
That is a slippery slope. They're going to look and say, well, the guy's got drug convictions, but they're just, small sales, small possession. You're going to have to lower the standards. You cannot do that in this profession because it will lead to corruption.
Yeah, you better believe it. Sheriff David Clark, Milwaukee County Sheriff, it's great to have you on. We appreciate it.
Great to be here.
Do you know these guys? Bill Whittle, Kirk Schlichter of Town Hall. Bill Whittle's great friend of NRA.
How you guys doing?
Sheriff, do you mind if I ask you a quick question?
Sure, go ahead.
You were talking earlier about some of these root causes, and you were saying that there's so many women who are having multiple children. Isn't it true that in among the criminal population, the number one correlator across race, across economic backgrounds, is fatherless boys? That these are locked up at an incredible rate.
One author wrote on this, Fatherless America, and he called it America's most urgent social crisis, and it is. We all know that young boys who grow up without fathers, more times than not, turn out to be unmanageable misfits that then the police have to deal with in an aggressive way. Fathers are responsible for the socialization of their sons and of young boys. Teach them respect for authority, respect for women, that sort of thing. And when they're not there, that void is filled by who? They're out there with gang members, other people who have no respect for anything, and that's how they're learning how to become men that way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, somehow, but that's the thing that the black community is going to have to come to grips with. That somehow we're going to have to rebuild the black family, rebuild the culture, shed some of this cultural rot, adopt more mainstream aspects of culture. I didn't say throw their whole culture away,
no, of course,
but more mainstream that lead to cultural success that other cultures have done. They pick, hey, I like this part of this culture over here. Even for example, let's say Asians. They come over here and they go, I like this aspect of Western culture over here. I'll take a little of that. I won't get rid of my Asian culture, but this might help strengthen ours. That's what they do. Instead, we have, because of the lack of leadership in the black community, hanging on to these negative cultures, school failure, fathering kids out of wedlock, joining gangs, things like that. We're walking around with your pants down, at the bottom of your rear end. Which emulates prison culture, by the way. That's where that came from. So it's that kind of cultural rot that black leadership is going to have to stand up, look in the mirror, and develop the moral courage to look at our people, self-criticism, and say, we got to knock that crap off. We got to shun the cultures of the black underclass, develop more mainstream aspects of this culture to strengthen and rebuild it again. Because remember, before this started, back in the 50s, 40s, blacks were very family-oriented.
Absolutely.
70% of black kids prior to the 1960s, 70% were born into intact families. We didn't see all this crime. We didn't see it at a young age. Blacks were industrious. Blacks wanted to work. They migrated north, not looking for a handout or government largesse. They moved more north because the Industrial Revolution was happening, and that's where the jobs were. We came looking for work. Now it's been replaced by a government check.
And we have a welfare system that subsidizes out of wedlock children. The more out of wedlock children a woman has, the more she gets paid. It's like we're paying for this crime wave.
Sure, it's become a lifestyle.
Yeah.
All right. The government check has become a lifestyle. It's become like the job, right? Uncle Sam has replaced the father. Uncle Sam has become the provider. Roof over their head, food on the table. All those sorts of things. People need these sort of things when they reach a period in their life when there's, something happens that they can't control.
Absolutely.
In America, we like that, right?
Sheriff, I'm not sure it's just a black problem or just a Hispanic problem. I look at this as a financial problem because you could go into the trailer parks of East Texas where white people have no money, and oftentimes they are fatherless in those homes. This is a function of the economy in many respects that if we could get people out of poverty, I'm not talking about everybody become, a billionaire, but if you could get people into middle class, boy, many of these problems would be solved.
Sure. Well, in those communities, I look, because you're right, but you look at the numbers. That's where the disparity is. In the black community, the numbers are higher. It's not that they don't have dysfunction in some of the areas you talked about, trailer parks. I'm not downing all trailer park residents, but I look and I go, that is a problem. That's a smaller problem that someone else has to deal with. I can't deal with the world's problems. I'm trying to help my community. I'm trying to help, my culture. And I'm in a position to be able to do that. I have a platform such as yours where I get to talk about these things. But there are other people on Capitol Hill. There are other people in state legislators, people like in Congress like Elijah Cummings, people like John Conyers. Those guys have to develop Maxine Waters, have to develop the moral courage to do what I'm doing. Because when you do, I'll tell you what, I catch hell. I put a target on my back. But I always remind people, this isn't about me. I'm willing to sacrifice myself because I'm in a position of leadership. And when you're in a position of leadership, you better lead.
But, Sheriff, it's not going to happen from Elijah Cummings or Maxine Waters because they rely on those folks that are taking the subsidies to be reliant on the Democrats to hand out the subsidies. And they know they'll keep getting votes as long as they keep handing out money and cell phones.
Yeah, they've sold out to the progressives in the Democrat Party. They become the spokesperson for black life in America. It's wrong. That's why I said moral courage. There's some morality to what they're doing here, or immorality to what they're doing, but they're the ones that have to look themselves in the mirror every day. When I get up every morning and look myself in the mirror, I like the guy looking back at me.
Yeah. Hey, Sheriff David Clark, you're a great man. We appreciate you coming on. Thank you for all you do.
It's a pleasure to serve.
Absolutely. Great to meet you in person, too. Well, that is Sheriff David Clark, and boy, that's a guy who lives up to his own hype for sure, because he tells it like it is, and God bless him for it. We need more men in America like that.
Yeah, he's, it brings me back to Maxine Waters. I live right by that district, and I was in that district during the riots with the Army. M16, my guys, my National Guard troops. We were greeted and welcomed by the people there, but it was a mess. And now, fast forward 25, 26 years later, it's still a mess, and it's still Maxine Waters. Okay. This Democrat establishment is allowing its constituents to tread water, to not advance, to maybe get worse in many cases, and lining their own pockets while they do it. It's inexcusable.
Yeah. Donald Trump was the first Republican candidate I've seen ever who made an honest effort to get into the black community and just say, listen, there is another way. Instead of getting a free Obama phone, which is a piece of crap phone, if we get jobs, you can have the iPhone 7. You can be standing in line to get the best stuff in the world if you're working. And all you have to do is make an appearance. The Republicans have absolutely abandoned black voters, and we really have no one else to blame but ourselves for this, I think.
Donald Trump got more black voters than any other Republican in decades. Now, here was something that I thought was significant. During his speech the night of the election, he came out there, and this is a historic event. This is an amazing event where he beats Hillary Clinton. He takes time out of that speech to say, and I'm going to go into the black community, and we are going to fix the black community. He didn't have to say that.
No, he didn't. That's right.
But that's important to him.
I'm the first one to question politicians when they say something. Are they sincere? You always hear politicians coming out and saying things that are going to garner them votes. Clearly, the black community for Republicans is not a sure vote by any means, if anything but. But Donald Trump, I actually believe the man was sincere when he said, I want to reach out to the black community. I believe he was sincere about it.
No, I think he was, and I think it's smart politics. If he gets 20% of the black vote across the country,
the Democrats never would have.
Yeah, they're destroyed, and they better be scared.
So he got 13% of black men, which was up from
like 4.
Absolutely. And that is amazing. And that should not be discounted as for one of the reasons why Donald Trump won, because it's a tremendous number.
But the one thing that the Democrats did actually lose, and this ought to scare them to their bones, working class people voted Republican this last election more than Democrat. And here's the thing, that's not just like losing a voting block. That's losing your identity. The entire Democratic Party identity for a century now, at least, has been we're the party of the little guy. We're the party that's going to protect you against these, these rapacious corporate overlords and so on. And if the Democratic Party loses working people, they've not just lost a voter block, they've lost their soul, they've lost their identity.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. We had just a moment ago Dutch TV coming up over here and shooting our NRATV set, the Dutch Broadcasting Network. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb. What do you think they were saying about our NRATV set?
I bet they were saying that they've never seen such attractive people in their lives.
That's right.
They're saying, this is much worse than wooden shoes. What are you guys doing?
Yeah, that's right, you guys.
Look, I lived in Europe for a long time as part of the Army, a couple tours. They have a very different mindset. I now understand why my ancestors left.
Yeah.
The Europeans have basically given up their culture. They've given up Western civilization. They've given up their identity. They've gone from being citizens to being subjects. And it alarms them, and I think in some ways, makes them resentful when we stand up and say, look, we are free citizens. We will arm ourselves to protect our communities, our families, our Constitution. We will be heard. Not some bureaucrat in Brussels. We're going to be heard.
And that's the message here at CPAC. It really is. Kirsch Schlichter, it's great talking to you. I'm here with Bill Whittle, and I'm Grant Stinchfield. We want to go into the convention hall. There is a governor's panel underway. Scott Walker is on that governor's panel. We also have Matt Bevin, a great conservative from Kentucky, Doug Ducey from Arizona, and Sam Brownback from Kansas. So let's go into the governor's panel.
Let us do the ones that decide those decisions, not the federal government.
I agree completely with those things that were said, and it's interesting when you think about what is the one area where we have felt the most encroachment. It's hard to think of a single one. I think even of just the lawsuits, I've been governor for a year, the lawsuits that I've had to engage in on behalf of the Commonwealth of Kentucky against the federal government, pushing back against the federal government dictating who goes into our locker rooms and bathrooms in the public schools is number one. Number two, pushing back in a lawsuit against the federal government dictating which doctors would or would not, or in fact, in their instance, all would be required to perform sex change operations under fear of losing their license, pushing back on that. Pushing back on the overtime rule that came out of the Department of Labor that was trying to be jammed down the throat of small business. You mentioned the EPA, the streams rules, the methane rule, all these are just a handful of the suits that we've been involved in the last year. The Environmental Protection Agency truly has become a regulatory Frankenstein. It began arguably with good intent. You go back and you read Shelley's book about Frankenstein, it too was created with good intention, and it turned on its creator. Nobody wants to drink dirty water or breathe dirty air. There's not a state, Republican or Democrat alike, that, to Governor Walker's point, could not manage this and would not be incentivized to manage this at the state level. We all want this. The fact of the matter is, whether it is the environmental, whether it's education, whether it's commerce, whatever the case might be on the energy front, is, well, push these things back to the state level control. That is where federalism was intended to be in the first place.
So let's follow that line of thought. How do we make that happen? How do we, in effect, turn back the clock and return the power to the states? How can our federal representatives help us do that?
Let me say something on that real quick. You're how we make it happen. Literally. This is what a government of and by and for the people does. If we abdicate our responsibility, and this is where I'm begging those of you that are watching, but those of you, the thousands of you that are assembled here for this CPAC conference, the reality is of and by and for the people only works if the people get engaged. It only works if you truly knock doors, make phone calls, get engaged, talk to people, create dialogue like you've never done it before. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And the greatest demise of any culture, any civilization, or any form of government worth having, including the noble experiment that we've been blessed with by people who had brilliant minds 240 years ago, The only way this is preserved is if the people stay engaged, because the greatest demise always comes from apathy. Cultures and civilizations crumble from within. It is the apathy of the populace that destroys great civilizations. Don't let it happen on your watch.
No, Matt hit it right on the head. It's interesting. Just a couple weeks ago, we put out our state budget, and the immediate response from the media was, what are you doing to lobby the legislature to pass it? And I said, I'm not. I'm going out to the people. And so I spent the very next day and the day after traveling my state, making the case as to why the budget had merit in it, and asked them to call their representatives. Even though we have Republican majorities, as I mentioned before, that we've added to, it's still important for people, no matter what party they are, to hear from people who care about these issues. Because certainly, as we've seen in the last month or so, they're going to hear from the left. They need to hear just as much from you and from others like you across this country about what are priorities. And to this specific issue, again, I don't think we can stress it enough. It is important, and I think as governors, we've shown it in our respective states already, certainly Republican governors have, that it's not enough just to change the map from blue to red. It's not enough. And you got to have transformation. This is an opportunity, a unique opportunity in time to have transformational change just up the way in our nation's capital. And that means you're going to have to push for it, because you can see the challenges they're having right now just dealing with the repeal and replace of Obamacare, with the challenges they're having just dealing with comprehensive tax reform. In that city, under the circumstances and the environment that they live in, it is difficult to do those things. We can't be just satisfied with saying we've got a Republican in the White House and Republican majorities in the states. We've got to demand more, not just for ourselves, but really, as I asked for the hands of the college students who are here before, I think of my sons, Matt and Alex. For them, I don't want them to inherit the mess, even a mess that's controlled by Republicans in Washington. I want to inherit a country that our founders intended, which is one where powers were precisely spelled out for the federal government, and those that weren't concretely in the Constitution were inherently the rights of the states and, more importantly, the people. We need to demand that once and for all. Exactly.
Two things come to mind for me. One is approve Judge Gorsuch to go on the U.S. Supreme Court. That would be a very helpful thing because of the dominance of the Supreme Court. And the second is to understand the philosophical underpinnings of what our society and our form of government is, and why socialism doesn't work. Okay? I mean, I think we need to, you've got the left moving hard towards a much more bigger government, government taking more, government doing more. And a lot of people on the left saying, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. No, this is a terrible idea. Since when have we added more government anywhere that's taken more taxes, and you end up with a product that's more efficient that costs you less? When have you what's your example? But what we have seen is when you pull government out of something, you get a product that tends to be higher quality and cost you less because you got more competition for that. Look at your telephone, and when we used to have a lot of regulation. Look at your airline. When we used to have a lot of regulation, much higher, more expensive, fewer options that you had, and poor service. Why would we want to go that way? And I think you need to be able to talk and to articulate to people what are the philosophical underpinnings. And the final point on this, Michael Novak was a great writer, just passed away this past week. And I just got his book that I'm carrying with me to read, On Two Wings, where he talked about the forming of the foundation of this country on the two wings, and it was one based on the faith and the other based on the reason and the common sense of what this could produce and the fruit that comes out of this, the fruit of America. That is great. We need to understand that philosophical underpinnings and carry that on forward so we know what we would believe and we can express it.
In so many ways, the people in this room have done their job. We have a conservative House, a conservative Senate. We have a conservative that's going to be put on the Supreme Court. And what I said to my team on the Wednesday after the Tuesday election is that we can celebrate today, but we need to get to work tomorrow. The victory is not on November 8th. That is an assignment for change and real reform. So we need to see repeal and replacement of Obamacare. We need to see real tax reform. We need to see a federal government that gets its spending under control. So I think that as governors, as activists, as engaged citizens, we need to hold all elected leaders accountable for results in this cycle. Right now, we may not get the same opportunity again. We can't squander it.
Exactly.
Let's switch gears to a specific topic. Let's talk about K through 12 education. And all of you have focused on education one way or another during your terms. Arguably, the United States no longer has the best K through 12 system in the world. We're slipping by a number of studies. How do we reverse that, particularly in our big cities? There aren't many, if any, big city public school systems that are working. How do we attack that very tough problem?
This has been a big subject in Arizona. I was fortunate to have a governor that preceded me by about 25 years named Fife Symington, along with a superintendent of public instruction, Lisa Graham Keegan, who sowed the seeds with the first in the nation public charter school laws. I know that you know that a charter school is a public school with private management. Today in Arizona, we have 500 charter schools. We have 180,000 children in those charter schools. We lead the nation in parental choice. Arizona has 3 of the top 10 public high schools in the nation that are as good as any schools in the country. Our district schools have improved because of this competition and choice. And I think that this is the way forward, is to provide parental choice, provide innovation, let parents be consumers. They know what's best for their children. I think we've got a great model in Arizona. I think we've got an incredible Secretary of Education in Betsy DeVos, who believes in parental choice, and I think that that's the way forward.
I would answer that with a question. The data is what it is. I mean, you're seeing a slippage in our ranking as far as the performance of our students globally. But higher education, I don't think there's another place in the world that has the quality of higher education the United States does. No comparison in our states, and we all compete. We all compete against each other, and so I guess as your kids graduated, and I had 5 children graduating, there was schools competing for them all over. We were getting mailings every day. We're looking at rankings, and you ask, well, okay, how did we get that one so right, and we're not doing so well in this other one? It's choice and competition with information. Yes. So you got a marketplace in one, and the other one you got kind of a state run without. So I think it's information. Schools should be graded so that people know. I think it's options. People should be able to have options, and so that you can have that sort of competition. We know how to do this well. If you just look at the higher education system, and one of my schools in Kansas that's going to win the Final Four this year. I mean, you know, we understand competition. Maybe we'll have 3 in it.
Well, Sam raised a great point. I've got 2 sons, one who's here with some of his fellow students from Wisconsin. Alex is a senior at the University of Wisconsin. My other son has been here for years, graduated last year from Marquette University, a private Jesuit Catholic institution. He's actually at work today. Thankfully, he's working. I said, you're really not an empty nester till they're off the payroll. So I got 1 down, 1 to go. But I often say, when we talk about choice, people say, well, what about that? I said nobody flinches when I say I got 1 son that was at Marquette and 1 son at the University of Wisconsin. Nobody goes, well, that's odd. No. Because they picked a school that was right for them. And as a nation, both in the state and in the federal government, we give students assistance through financial aid and student loan assistance. We give them to both. Why? For your exact reasons. Good competition, we perform well, we have people from all over the world who come to our colleges and universities. So I think you hit the nail on the head. It's about competition, not only amongst different choices. So Doug talked about charters. We got charters galore. We had, similar to the history you mentioned, Tommy Thompson, about 25 years ago, helped create the first public school choice, the first parental school choice program in the nation in Milwaukee. My predecessor kind of pulled back on that. We lifted the caps, we lifted the income, we lifted the numbers, and you've had all sorts of families, because I trust parents. I trust parents to make the right decisions for their sons or daughters. But we also made a change not only in terms of allowing for more charter and more voucher schools, and we allowed it statewide as well. We also kind of broke that monopoly within the public schools. Because part of the challenge historically that public schools have had is under these union contracts, collective bargaining contracts of the past, they were stuck. And I remember years ago, long before I was governor, there was in the city of Milwaukee, there was a teacher who was the outstanding new teacher of the year as an English teacher for the entire state. And the state government, again, when Democrats were in charge, not me and Republicans, actually cut money to the schools. And so in turn, they had to make spending reductions. And what did they do under the old contracts? The last hired was the first fired. The last in was the first out. So this woman, who had been named the outstanding new English teacher of the year for the entire state, was one of the first to be laid off. Well, that makes no sense. It's illogical. She was exactly the kind of teacher you want in a place like Milwaukee in an urban school district. So what we did through Act 10, and now others are doing similar things around the country, we changed that. We broke that monopoly even within the public school system, and now public school districts in our state can operate like charter schools. They can hire and fire based on merit. Seniority and tenure is gone. They can pay based on performance. They can put the best and the brightest in their classroom.
I was struck by something that both Scott and Sam said, the word monopoly and the idea that the government being involved in something isn't necessarily a good thing. Digressing slightly and then coming back to education, think about this. Anytime the federal government has declared war on something, it means it's going to cost you hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars, and you will, after 50 years or more, end up with more of what you declared war on. And I defy you to think of any example where that's not the case. War on poverty, how's that working? War on drugs, how's that working? War on terror, how's that working? I mean, the bottom line is, it is a code phrase for taking your money. And the same thing has been done in education for a long time. It isn't to say that we don't need good public education. Thomas Jefferson said we need to use taxpayer dollars to educate young people, because why? We want to produce virtuous citizens. What is a virtuous citizen? It's somebody who's engaged, who is a fabric of their community, who is part of the integral part of society because they are working, and work is a virtue. There is a reason for this. Kentucky is one of 7 states where there is zero competition for public education dollars. That's about to change. We're going to bring charter schools to Kentucky. That will happen this year. That's legislation that hasn't passed, but I'm confident I'll be signing that into law. Number 2, it's important for us to recognize the fact that it is the idea that every kid coming straight out of high school needs to get a 4-year degree is nonsense. That's a fact. And we need to start to recognize the idea that we're sending every kid, 60% of the kids in Kentucky go straight on to college. Only 20% of them graduate in a timely manner or at all. The reality is we're sending kids down a path that we shouldn't be sending them down. So what is the alternative? How do they become virtuous citizens? How do we get good ROI as taxpayers for our public education dollars? The way you do it is you rethink K through 12. Maybe you start thinking about K through 14. In the 21st century, everybody's going to have some kind of post-secondary training, certification, whatever the case might be. So start focusing on apprenticeship programs. Start scaling things up that train people. Start reinvigorating at the high school level things like vocational training. Let's start having internships. Let's start being realistic with the situation that we're faced with. Last thing I'll say is this. We did 2 things. We put $100 million into workforce development, $100 million that said the only way the state is going to come alongside, first of all, we're not going to give you 100% of whatever you ask for. We're not building lots of new buildings. We're going to look at programs. What we're going to do with that $100 million is require the local high school, the local post-secondary school, whatever that might be, technical school, 4-year school, whatever, and the local business community, all 3 together have to jointly apply for this money. If all 3 start talking, good things happen. The first $65.5 million that we've put out is being matched by $85+ million coming from the community because they love their idea so much, they're going to do it whether we fund it or not. That's where good ideas come from. Young people deserve better opportunities in terms of education, and it doesn't just simply mean getting a degree in interdisciplinary studies.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. We could have this conversation for a couple more hours, I know. Boy, isn't it invigorating and exciting to hear what's going on in the states? Let's have one more great big round of applause for our governors. Thank you.
Well done, brother. So I hope I wasn't waving the...
All right, so that is the 4 governors, Matt Bevin, Sam Brownback, Doug Ducey, and, of course, Scott Walker here at CPAC. A fascinating panel to listen to them talk about all kinds of policies and principles that are so important to the people here and really so important to the success of America. When you hear them talk, and they got into some intricate details, specifically at the end there, about 4-year colleges and the need for 4-year colleges, or this myth that everyone needs a 4-year degree. There is no doubt in my mind that we've got to get back to the basics when it comes to education. Some kids just aren't cut out for college. Sometimes it's not the right thing for them. Why are we spending so much money on education when then they could have vocational training? And I think more and more high schools in America need to get back to vocational training. Bill Whittle is here with me. Bill, what did you think of that panel? Really fascinating stuff.
The first thing I thought was, boy, we have a great bench. I mean, this Republican Party has a great bench. These guys are young, and they're brilliant, and they're confident, and they're actually getting things done. They're not just talking about it. Grant, we were talking about Scott Walker earlier. They're getting things done. But what I think we also saw there was we saw this whole idea of federalism, the whole idea that the individual states should be able to keep as much power as possible, because if it goes to the federal government, you have Common Core, single point of failure, it's state-sponsored, stupid. But when you've got 50 different governors working with different things and different plans and finding out what's working, you have real solutions. And I was so impressed by these 4 governors.
You know, when you talk about states' rights, and which is such an important thing to so many people here, if not all the people here, states' rights are imperative because just on the broad notion that a bureaucrat in Washington would know what's good for the folks in Kansas, or a bureaucrat in Washington would know what's good for the folks in South Dakota. They have no idea, and we see this going on with education and Common Core. Well, you want to put educational issues in the hands of the teachers, of the parents, of the local administrators of a school district. I don't want Washington touching anything of mine. And it is important to remember, and Bill, I know you are well schooled on this, it is the states that have given the rights to the federal government. The federal government does not give the states rights. The states created the federal government, and the federal government better remember that.
If you can give me just a minute to get out in the weeds here for a second, constitutionally, the reason we're in the trouble we're in today is because of the 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment changed the way that we elected senators. The way our government was designed would be the House of Representatives was the House of the people, and the Senate was the House of the states. And so prior to the 17th Amendment, state legislatures would send people, let's say Alabama sends 2 senators to Washington. Those 2 senators aren't watching for the concern of the people of Alabama. That's what the House is for. Those 2 senators were there to watch for the state of Alabama, that the state of Alabama, let's say, was not going to be diminished, that they weren't going to take powers away. So when these progressives said, oh, let's just have popular election of senators, they just turned it into a House of Lords. You know, granted, it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, which was protect the individual rights and identities of the states.
Yeah, there was still a push to do away with that and get back to having senators elected that way. And it might do us some good. I don't think you're ever going to get to the point of seeing that, strictly because most Americans are uninformed about the issues. We are told Jim DeMint may be coming onto the stage. We'll take a shot of inside just to show how many people are there and the excitement in the room. There is Jim DeMint, the former senator, now head of the Heritage Foundation. Let's go listen to Jim DeMint, a great conservative.
How many of you are here at CPAC for the first time? Let me just see some hands. All right, let's give them a big CPAC welcome, some of you veterans. How many of you have been to 5 or more CPAC meetings? I want to see those hands. All right, thank you, veterans. Thank you, veterans. How many of you voted last November? Who did you vote for? Okay, how many of you are grassroots activists back home who constantly work to make America great again? How many? All right, I want you to tell me one thing. Why are you here, and why do you work so hard back home for our country? Hey, I'm going to answer that one for you. Because America is worth fighting for. That's why we're here. Freedom is worth fighting for. Our ideas of individual liberty, of free markets, of traditional values, of strong defense, these are all worth fighting for. These conservative ideas make America great and make life better for everyone. But make no mistake, we will always have to fight for these ideas because freedom is the greatest threat to those on the left who crave power and control. We're going to have to fight. We can see the left all around us right now. I mean, they are literally freaking out at the rejection of their ideas and their candidates. You know, isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful to let them freak out? It's a big temper tantrum that they're having right now. But isn't it wonderful that we will never have to hear the words President Clinton again? Isn't that what, I mean? The left isn't protesting bad policies. They are protesting an election and the man Americans selected is their president. And they will do everything that they can to keep Trump from being successful. Last November, Americans dodged a bullet. No doubt about it, guys. And conservatives won a great victory. No doubt about it. But folks, let's not forget that there are no permanent victories here in Washington. All we won last November was the chance to get out of the stands and onto the field. Now, the real fight begins. That's why we're here. As we gear up and equip ourselves for the fight ahead, for the fight of our lives, let's always remember and warn everyone who will listen that Washington is extremely good at lowering expectations. Sound familiar? Okay, all the guardians of the swamp are already whispering in the ears of Republicans in the Congress and in the White House, telling them not to keep their promises. I've been in a lot of these Republican meetings, and I know what the lobbyists, the consultants, and the pollsters are saying. They're saying Republicans should not overreach, that politics is the art of the possible. What they mean is that politics is the protector of the status quo. Don't rock the boat. Find the easiest road and take it. They're saying you can't build a wall and control our borders. You have to give amnesty and citizenship to the people who are here illegally. They're saying you can't repeal Obamacare. Tax reform is just too controversial. You can't ever balance the budget. And of course, you must reopen the big, crony, corrupt Export-Import Bank. That's what they're hearing behind closed doors right now. The list goes on and on. But our job as conservatives and as the national conservative movement is to make possible what the establishment says is impossible. We must think big. We must act bold. That's the American way. Remember our founders. When they signed the Declaration of Independence, they weren't practicing the art of the possible. They were dreaming an impossible dream to win their independence from the most powerful country in the world. But by dreaming, by believing, by working, by fighting, they made possible what was considered impossible by all the experts of the day. You know, President Lincoln had an almost impossible dream of keeping America united. Many fought and died to save this last great hope of humanity, but they made possible what seemed impossible. Barry Goldwater dreamed an impossible dream by running a presidential campaign on conservative ideas. He lost, but his willingness to fight for the right ideas paved the way for Ronald Reagan to eventually win the presidency on the same conservative ideas. And we know all the experts and pollsters said that Donald Trump's quest for the presidency was an impossible dream. But we found out again that in America, nothing is impossible. Fellow conservatives, this is our time. We cannot allow our representatives in Washington to squander this opportunity and again fall short of the promises that we've made to the American people. We cannot allow the left, the media, and squeamish Republicans to tell us that policies that will make life better for every American are impossible. We must and we can repeal Obamacare now. Every Republican in the House and the Senate voted to repeal Obamacare in 2015 and sent it to the president, and they should send that same bill to President Trump right now. Folks, the excuse we're hearing that we can't repeal Obamacare until we replace it is absolutely ludicrous. Before Obamacare, America had the best health care system in the world. Obamacare has become a cancer on our health care system. We don't need to replace the health care system, we need to remove the cancer. That's what we need to do right now. And once Obamacare has been removed, we will still have our doctors, our nurses, our hospitals, our insurance companies, Medicaid and Medicare plans and veterans hospitals. It's all going to still be there. No one loses their insurance. And once we get rid of Obamacare, we can begin to improve our health care system so that it works for every American. Obamacare must be repealed right now. Tell it to Congress. We must cut taxes and simplify the tax code right now to get our economy going. It will take a year or more, folks. It'll take a year or more for a pro-growth tax system to begin to rebuild our economy. So we must act now because Congress won't touch taxes next year in an election cycle. We've got to get it done. And we must protect religious liberty in America. We've got to reverse 8 years of abuse on our religious liberty by this Obama administration. We can end government taxpayer funding of Planned Parenthood, and we can do it now. We can also end government funding of public broadcasting and other immoral elections that don't need government funding. We can do it now. And Republicans must make sure that this big, crony, corrupt export-import bank has made its last loans to China, Russia, and Iran, and other places around the world that don't need American money. It's a great time. The opportunities for conservatives have never been greater. And we cannot allow the loud voices inside Washington to lower our expectations and convince us that the dreams of all Americans cannot be achieved. Let's all give Congress a big kick in the seat of the pants. Let's tell them to get to work and to keep their promises. Let's keep dreaming impossible dreams because in America, everything is possible. I thank you. The Heritage Foundation thanks you because America is always worth fighting for. Thank you, and God bless. Thanks, folks.
That was Jim DeMint, who was taking over the Heritage Foundation, which is without question one of the most remarkable organizations in the country. And it's remarkable because it's like the Heritage Foundation is kind of like the electrical system of a city. It lives below the structure. You don't get to see it, but they're so connected to so many different things. They're doing so much good work. And DeMint, when I remember when DeMint left Congress, I thought, oh my God, we've lost a warrior. But Heritage is just it's involved with everything, Grant.
I will tell you when I ran for Congress, I used the Heritage Foundation as my own research team. Now, I don't know if they knew that or not, but I always made it a point to give some money to them because the research that they do at the Heritage Foundation on conservative principles is really amazing. And I urge people to check out that site. I believe it's heritage.org. They do the Daily Signal as well, which is a daily newspaper, online, of course. The wealth of information that the Heritage Foundation provides and the voice of conservatism that it provides, they could not have gotten a better leader as Jim DeMint.
Absolutely.
And I will tell you, Bill, you want to know my greatest compliment that I ever got? Okay, so, well, it wasn't the greatest that I ever got, but almost the greatest that I got. The Dallas Morning News endorsed my opponent for Congress when I was running. And the reason they did not endorse me, you ready for this? I was a Jim DeMint conservative.
Oh, dear goodness gracious.
And that's why they couldn't. And I thought, boy, if you're not going to get endorsed,
you bet
that's about the best compliment you can get.
You're
from
a Ronald Reagan conservative. We don't want anything to do with you. DeMint was a leader in the Congress. DeMint's been a leader with the Heritage Foundation. I'm quite sure he's much more effective running Heritage than he would be as just another member of the Congress. But again, the thing that's so impressive to me, and I think that most people don't really understand about Heritage, is so much of it is subsurface, Grant. It's connected to so many things. There's so many research programs. There's so many things it's part of in terms of education and think tanks and back and forth. It's like the electrical grid of a city that is beneath your feet the whole time, and you never know it's there until it goes.
You raise a great point about where the basis of power really is. And so we could run for Congress, we could run for the United States Senate, and certainly you have some amounts of power, more as a senator than you do as a congressman. I think today congressmen are basically all but diminished. I don't think they have very much power.
Absolutely.
What we do here on NRATV, what you do with your videos online and your subscriber base, and what I do on my radio show back in Dallas, there is no better way to hold elected leaders accountable than through those alleys. And I think in many respects, hosting a show on NRATV or doing videos that have millions of viewers like you have on YouTube gives you more power than many elected leaders have.
Without question. And more, and every, not just the elected leaders, every single day what we're doing now becomes more and more part of the future, and the mainstream media newscast that's on at 7 p.m. is more and more part of the past. People get the news when they want it now. They go online for their news, and that means that their news is waiting for them. They can pick their own outlets, and it's another one of these cases of competition. When we grew up, there were 3 networks, right? There were 3 car companies. You could buy a Ford, a Chrysler, or a Chevy. You could listen to ABC, CBS, or NBC. You had the Bell Telephone Company, and now all of this stuff is fractured so much that certainly an organization like NRATV is putting together more actual listeners and viewers than many big network shows.
Do you know what I pride myself on? And we talk about having some power from being on the show. We can call a lawmaker and say, hey, do you want to come on NRATV? They're going to jump
clout,
to come through.
Absolutely.
It's clout. But you know what? It's not my clout. It's not your clout.
No, absolutely.
This clout comes from all the members of the NRA and beyond that, and all conservatives, because I truly believe, and I say this very humbly, that I am so blessed, and you are so blessed, and we are so blessed to be able to be a voice for everybody else. All we're doing is saying everything that other people would want to say, and we have an outlet to say it, and God bless the NRA and 570 KLIF, which gives me a radio outlet, and your YouTube channel, and BillWhittle.com. Because that outlet is really, it's not ours, it's the people's, the conservatives.
Oh, he's exactly right. People often say, wow, it's really great what you're doing. And I say, I'm not a painter, I'm a photographer. I'm not making this stuff up. I'm just showing you what's actually happening in this world and with this amazing system of government that we have. And the NRA becomes even more important when you think about the fact that it is so overwhelmingly left-wing. Here's the thing, Grant. Donald Trump won this election by a couple points in enough states to win the Electoral College. But Donald Trump was running against, I'm dead serious now, I bet he was running against a 30 or 40-point headwind when you count all of the media boosting for Hillary, all the stuff they covered up, all the attacks on Trump. There's 30 points at the polls that are entirely artificial, that are coming into our faces. We have to sail against that headwind. And it's only the sort of stalwart defense of the NRA that's been here for decades and decades and decades. Things have been getting better because of the NRA, but there were times when, that was it. That's all there was.
Yeah. And so when you take that power and you try to center it, clearly money has a lot to do with it. So donations to the NRA, because it funds all the actions in Washington that we can go get the ear of lawmakers and try to make things happen on a lobbying front. But really, that's the power of the members. The lobbyists are just the voice, just as the TV guys are the voice of the members. But it comes from passion as well. And so when you talk about all of these members, all the conservatives, the passion is what gets things done. Passion in a way where people are informed like I've never seen before. And now we have an opportunity for the first time in at least 8 years.
At least
8
probably more.
Years, to really move this country in a positive direction. And I will say this, and I always want to remain positive. But if we do not do something about the direction Barack Obama took this country, I will be through the roof. And I believe that the House of Representatives specifically, and in many respects the United States Senate, is sitting back on their heels. They are not acting fast enough. We could be pushing through some of these very important issues, and they're sitting around talking about it and debating it, and nothing, again, in Washington is getting done.
I think we might have talked to this on your show a couple times, but I think Donald Trump did more between his election and his inauguration than Barack Obama did in 8 years. Before he even got in the office, there's a picture going around of Barack Obama looking at a desk, and there's like one piece of paper there, and he's glancing down at it as if maybe I should deal with this. And next to it is a picture of Donald Trump. He's got 4 stacks of papers. He's got the phone in his hand. We were talking about during his inauguration speech, he's just been inaugurated as President of the United States of America, and he looked like a guy who had someplace he had to be. He's like, this is the centerpiece of somebody's life. And he's like, let's get this thing moving here. These invocations are nice, but we got a country we got to run.
And he did. As soon as he left the inauguration, he got right to work.
Bam. And that is so infectious, that work ethic. There's a term you don't hear too often in politics, huh? A work ethic. That he is saying we only have a limited amount of time in the day. That's why he sleeps 4 hours a day, I guess. And we have an obligation to the American people to give them their money's worth.
Right, absolutely. And so now, obviously on NRATV, our biggest issue is gun rights.
Right.
And what is happening now, what we are seeing across the nation, is there is a war on gun ownership, and it's being played out in state house to state house. In Texas, luckily, we're pushing pro-gun legislation through, but it's a very, very red state, and don't believe anybody that tells you Texas is turning blue anytime soon. But there are many swing states and, of course, left-wing states that are doing everything they can to attack your ability to own and buy a firearm, from forcing people to buy insurance, from raising the price of a pistol permit fee in Connecticut, to assault weapons bans, AR-15 style weapons bans across the country. They have no idea. And then we saw the ruling that came down yesterday right here in Maryland, where they related an AR-15. And to quote the ruling, they said there is basically no difference between an AR-15 and an M16 military-style rifle. If you've ever fired an M16 and you've ever fired an AR-15, you will tell instantly there is a very, very big difference between the two. But we have activist courts that we are now up against as well. So the battle, when you go and talk about state legislatures, you talk about courts that have been turned Democratic for a very, very long time, and I think it's going to be harder than we think for Donald Trump to get through some of these court judges at the circuit and appellate courts, because they have to be approved by the state senator. If the state senator says, I have an objection to that judge in Washington state, how is Donald Trump going to get a conservative in Washington state when you've got a liberal senator who's going to say no? And they will say no. And that's why we had the ruling that we did from Judge Robart about Donald Trump's immigration deal. They say, oh, well, it's a Bush appointee. Well, yeah, it was a Bush appointee, but you had to get him through 2 Democratic senators.
Well, first of all, Donald Trump is absolutely the first really 21st century president. He understands that through outlets like Twitter, he can talk directly to the American people. He doesn't have to go through the press bias. He doesn't have to go through the legislature. He can just talk straight to the American people. Yeah, I think if we're going to be honest, though, we make a mistake on our side of the fence, and we make it repeatedly. And that mistake is we get bogged down in the weeds of the issue. So all of a sudden we find ourselves arguing about whether or not a 30-round magazine is a high-capacity magazine or not. And this is exactly what they want. They want it down to these minutia, when in point of fact, we shouldn't be talking about magazine cartridges or barrel lengths or pistol grips. We should be saying, does a 97-pound, 30-year-old school teacher have a right to defend her life in a parking lot at midnight, yes or no? And when you get to that point, then they have to come out and say, no, they don't have a right. They have to lie down into a chalk circle and die so that I can be comfortable morally at my cocktail parties.
So I went back and looked at some of Judge Scalia's rulings on some of these issues after the Maryland court case came out yesterday, basically comparing AR-15s to M16s. Judge Scalia really didn't like the limitation that weapons of war, what the left pushes to. He said when the Second Amendment was written, they were using flintlock rifles. And just because we've had technology, and when you talk about a well-regulated militia, it was under the assumption that the people would end up going into the militia if they had to, that they needed weapons of war.
There's so much to say about this. You know, the progressives want to say, well, I suppose the Second Amendment was okay when we had flintlock muskets, but not AR-15 weapons of war. The musket was the most deadly weapon on the face of the earth, by far. The most deadly weapon on the face of the earth, and the founders understood that the limits on the American people's ability to hold that power is just absolute. When you hear these people say things like, well, I suppose it would be okay if we just allowed flintlock muskets, but the founders never could have envisioned, an fully automatic rifle. And so therefore we have to stay with, what they had at the time of the founding. My response to that would be, you're talking on the internet, for God's sake, and your right to free speech isn't limited to a quill and a bottle of ink, or how loud you can shout in a town square. Your freedom of speech isn't affected by this increase in technology. The founders said that the American people should have the weapons that they want in order to feel that they are defending their lives, and it doesn't matter what the model is.
You know, it's interesting. There was a petition on We the People, which if you get 100,000 signatures, you get a White House response. It was in response to, should we do away with the National Firearms Act? And this regulates machine guns and all types of things. You know, I think it ended with 200 and something thousand signatures. So it'll be interesting because Donald Trump will now have to respond to doing away with the National Firearms Act. And literally, if you get back to the basics of the Constitution, there should be no limits whatsoever on firearms.
Yeah, people say, well, are you saying that everybody should own a tank? I'm saying, if they're going to come after us with tanks, then yeah, I wouldn't mind having a tank. You know, this is the thing. The Second Amendment is there. It's not to stop criminals, although it's real good at that. It's not to stop, for hunting. It's there to protect us against the government. And as the government's weaponry becomes more advanced, the citizens' weaponry becomes more advanced. By the way, when they give you this stuff about a well-regulated militia, the definition of a militia is a group of people who have their own weapons. That's the difference between a militia and an army.
Yeah, you better believe it. Well, one guy who knows a hell of a lot about those issues and is a tremendous constitutionalist is my Texas senator, which is Senator Ted Cruz. He's getting ready to speak here in a few moments. So we're going to cover his speech live. He obviously, we all know he ran for president. He came up short. He was the winner here at CPAC by quite a large margin, which goes to show you he really was the choice of the strong conservative movement in America. They looked at Ted Cruz as a strong constitutionalist, and he got to the heart of what the Constitution was. And I will say this about Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is sincere. He has exceeded my expectations, no matter what the left says. But I don't think Donald Trump was a constitutionalist. No. I don't think he talked about it like you and I talk about it, like Ted Cruz talks about it. But he's learning on the fly, and I do think he's trying Donald Trump, that is, to learn more about and it sounds so crazy to say a president learning about the Constitution, but he was not a constitution like Ted Cruz is. Ted Cruz, well, I think by the time he was 3 years old, he was sitting in the bathroom reading the Constitution.
He was, as a matter of fact. He said he had memorized it at age 7 or something like that, memorized the whole thing. Ted, by a wide margin, has an intellectual capacity to deal with these issues that's just unmatched by anybody that was on that Republican platform when it began with 16 people. Ted is... the first time I saw Ted speak was 3 or 4 years ago, well before he ran for president. My first impression of Ted was, I don't know if this guy can be president because he seems too nice. He just seems like such a nice guy. And I was really concerned that he seemed so sincere and so gentle that people wouldn't think maybe he had the spine for it. But when he got on the national stage, I don't know if it was advisors or what, but he got really a little stiffer than he was in person and not nearly as personable.
Ted Cruz, you talking about?
Yeah.
So I know Ted Cruz fairly well. When I was running for Congress, he was running for Senate. We would be together. If Ted Cruz has a fault, he really isn't all that personable. He's not a guy's guy. He's not the kind of guy. And I've said, in order to get elected in America today, you need to be the